extinct. The dying out of a species or type indicates that its collective entity is itself passing out of incarnation. The plant evolution proceeds upward from simple grass-like structures to great spreading trees whose branches are the rudimentary patterns of arms. The trees, especially those that bear fruit, are the highest plant form. At the end of the present day of manifestation, the kingdom will move forward into an animal state, but there is no crossing from kingdom to kingdom except at the end of world cycles or periods. Plant life coming constantly in contact with higher kingdoms takes on some of the higher attributes, but these should not be accepted as evidence of true growth. Plant consciousness, such as it is purely instinctual like that of animals, but of a considerably lower order. A good example of the plant instinct is to be found in the case of ivy, which proceeds methodically in its process of finding a suitable surface upon which to grow. Experiments have been made in which ivy has been planted 10 feet from the nearest upright. The plant has proceeded without error directly toward the nearest trellis. Reincarnation in the plant WOR.TP 123. As it is obvious that the plant has no brain structure, its selectivity has created much discussion in the world of science. The answer is that the actual thinking is done by its collective entity which, controlling the growth of the plant, guides it toward its most convenient medium of expression. Throughout the plant world there is evidence of the guiding power of a superior intellect which cannot be attributed to the plant itself. Some call this nature, others the law of nature. But such terms merely cover the ignorance which prevails concerning group intelligences governing the inferior or less developed kingdoms of nature. After the plant has finished its plant evolution and proceed to its animal evolution, its collective intelligence will break up or individualize into separate entities. Then it will enter its human condition, and like man will receive its impulses from within rather than from without. In each of the natural kingdoms there are transitorial forms, links between kingdoms. Between the mineral and the plant there are the lichens and mosses. Between the plant and the animal are certain carnivorous plants, and also plants with elementary nervous systems such as the sensitive plant. Between the animal and man are the true anthropoids. And between man and the next order above him are the great initiates and teachers, the demigods of classical antiquity. As the plant is suspended from one central source which animates an entire order, it cannot reincarnate. But having disintegrated, its experience elements become part of the collective being. A good example of the power of the collective plant entity is a wheat field or a grass lawn. Here millions of similar structures function together experiencing 124 reincarnation, the cycle or necessity approximately similar circumstances. All wheat is suspended from one principle of wheat which renders the grain fertile even after it has lain for 4,000 years in an Egyptian tomb. All grass is one grass, and as the little leaves die new ones take their place. The principle is constantly emanating forms and gaining its evolutionary progress through the building of these structures. Life and death, here as in all other natural kingdoms, is merely the bestowing or removing of the vital contact. The plant seed is impregnated with the energy of the group entity and will carry this power from one age to another. But if the group entity goes out of incarnation, the types become sterile, and slowly all such forms disappear from the earth like the fantastic creations of the ancient times. Reincarnation in the mineral world. In the elemental system of the ancients, the mineral king Dom occupies the lowest place. The mineral life wave comes into incarnation with the formation of the cosmos, and remains with but slight modification until the dissolution of the cosmos. During a life wave, therefore, each mineral entity sends out only one series of bodies. Like the animals and plants, the mineral has no individualized entity. The mental, emotional, and growth principles remain with the entity. Only the physical body is individualized. There are many divisions within the mineral group, the most important being the division between metals and gems. The diamond is the highest in the order of precious stones, and gold the highest of the metals. In certain parts of Central Europe, gold is found to have a special affinity for certain plant orders, especially the grapes, sacred in antiquity as the highest of the fruits. Grapes planted in earth containing gold build this metal into their structure, so that by burning the branches and stems the gold can be extracted. The mineral kingdom is built up along lines of great mathematical precision. The earth itself, the collective mineral body, is composed of perfect geometrical segments. The 125-126 reincarnation, the cycle or necessity Earth's core of azoic rock is the absolute and fundamental part of the mineral kingdom, and the true abode of the collective mineral entity. All physical life is sustained by the mineral kingdom, which is not only the substance of the planet but supplies the chemicals necessary to the continuance of organic existence. It should be remembered that when mineral, plant, or animal life has been compounded in such structure as man, each preserves its own individuality but is coordinated and preserved in its proper relationship by the spiritual force emanating from the human ego. Having been incorporated in higher organisms, and then by the dissolution of these organisms reduced again to its free state, the mineral kingdom completes a minor cycle of incarnation. The element itself does not incarnate, but rather is incorporated into a superior form from which it later is released. This little cycle is the only method by which the mineral kingdom is capable of evolution. The entity behind all mineral existence is working through bodies incapable of growth, motion, emotion, or intelligence. That is, the forms are too elementary and imperfect for these higher qualities to manifest through them. Therefore the mineral has but one form of manifestation, and that is existence. It is capable of being, but incapable of extending that being along any specialized lines. It is the entity therefore that must ceaselessly strive to refine the outer form of the minerals. The crystals and gems represent the struggle that is going on to improve mineral types. But this improvement is so gradual that millions of years will pass before any noticeable change is effected. Reincarnation in the mineral war _P 127. It has been suggested that rocks, for example, may exist in two forms, living and dead. Disintegrated rock is not dead, more correctly, it is free. The disintegration of rock is paralleled in the human kingdom by the process of individualization which is constantly going on throughout society. This free rock is preparing for a seed-like existence, and therefore is much richer in energy than so-called living rock. The soil in which the farmer plants his crop is composed of this free earth which according to geology has been worn away from its original source by millions of years of struggle with storms, elements, and climates. The etheric body of the collective mineral entity hovers over, enfolds, and encloses all parts of the mineral kingdom, and is the link between the collective entity and its numerous mineral forms. This etheric body is not exuded by the rocks, but is the only visible, tangible part of the mineral group consciousness. It is well known that certain zones of the earth are especially associated with the phenomena of earthquakes. This is because here the mineral earth cell has lines of cleavage. Seismologists call these lines of cleavage faults. Earthquakes are electrical phenomena, and the discharge of electricity causes the greatest earth movement along the natural lines of cleavage. The ancients recognized the various precious stones as being the crystallization of planetary, zodiacal, and cosmic rays in the earth. These rays, by their crystallization, create complete constellations in the earth even as these same rays, when interpreted in the human kingdom, create a constellation of tribes and nations. This is the cause of the imputed powers of gems, which have a place in every system of mystic lore. 128 Reincarnation, the cycle or necessity. The mineral process of incarnation began while the planet Earth was still composed of a fiery mist. As this mist condensed, the mineral entities began precipitating bodies. At first these bodies were little more than tangible air, but the condensation continued with the result that minute granules appeared. These granules ultimately precipitated themselves into masses which the Tibetans term a form of clabber. The passing of thousands of millions of years increased the solidity of these masses, until substance as we know it came into existence. As soon as the mineral kingdom had been established, it became the foundation for all the other kingdoms. The plant entity began to mold plant forms out of the mineral substance. Later the animal entity began molding forms out of the plant stuff. And at last the individualized human entities began to fashion bodies out of the animal material. Each of the kingdoms is a degree of ensouled or enlivened physical substance. Every form in nature in a final analysis is composed of the mineral element. The higher kingdoms taking hold of the mineral particles vibrate them at a rate more rapid than their normal vibration. By so doing they fashion the mineral substances into bodies. As soon, however, as the energy leaves the body by the phenomenon of death, the artificial stimulus ceases and the mineral atoms return to their true estate, mineral substance. Thus all evolution on the earth is made up of mineral matter being combined in various patterns for the evolution of higher kingdoms. Reborn nations and races. The laws of reincarnation and karma may be applied not only to the life of the individual but to the destiny of the civilization of which he is a part. Nations and races, like individuals, are born, live out their destinies, and come to ultimate dissolution. Several ancient races have entirely disappeared from the earth, others are dying, still others are being born. A race is an entity, a type or kind of life which may endure for millions of years. A civilization is a mode of culture, an entity of tradition and ambition. A nation is a group or entity within a larger collective group. It is a political unity bound together within certain boundaries of time and place. The ancients believed that all of their communities, cities, and states were ruled over by patron divinities to whom appropriate offerings were made, and whose temples occupied the most honored places. According to Homer, when the Grecian states warred against the Trojans, the gods of the Greeks fought in the air against the gods of Troy. These gods were the tribal spirits revered since the beginning of recorded history. The members of various races take on a common complexion. Each group becomes a type apart, differing not only in greater matters of language and government but in the smallest customs, gestures, and attitudes. It is therefore 129-130 reincarnation, the cycle or NECS usually quite easy to distinguish between a Frenchman, an Italian, an Englishman, and an American. Each has his own peculiar ways of doing things, his own tradition, his own distinguishing peculiarities. In this way groups of people become party to common policies, they are warlike or peaceful, indolent or industrious, and by their various codes of action they bring upon themselves, individually and collectively, various consequences. The proud are humiliated, the humble are exalted, the persecuted are unified, and the prosperous are divided. In addition to present action, each race and nation brings out of the past a tradition, a heritage of good and evil for which that race or nation must make amends. The policies of a people determine absolutely the destiny of that people. Those who persecute shall be persecuted, those who destroy shall be destroyed. From the consequences of action there can be no escape. When a member of a certain tribe or clan begins to think differently from those about him, he is either cast out of the tribe or departs from it voluntarily, seeking some place where he will find others in agreement with his beliefs. Thus it is that such as outgrow their environment depart from it, either mentally or physically, and therefore are no longer subject to its karma or its laws. The story of America is an excellent example of progressive-minded people who left their own world to seek a better place in which to live and think. Individual growth liberates man from all social orders, step by step. But for the majority the rule of the herd prevails. The policies and inclinations of a people determine the end to which that people shall ultimately come. If the nation reborn nations and races 131 desires conquests, it shall ultimately be conquered. If it desires wealth beyond a reasonable degree, it shall ultimately be impoverished. It is a historically proved fact that those who live by the sword perish by the sword. All empires established upon injustice finally collapse from within. It is a law of nature that only the right can survive. A Parsi scholar once was asked how it came about that India, a land of philosophy and letters, of great ideals and a noble spiritual concept, should be deprived of its independence and fall under foreign yoke. The scholar replied that in a remote time the Aryan Hindus had descended from northern India and had driven the peaceful inhabitants of the great Indian peninsula into the sea, slaughtering many and enslaving the rest. Though this happened many thousands of years ago, the laws of karma decreed that those who had enslaved should in turn be enslaved. As of nations and races, So of communities. Each city and town has its own atmosphere, something about it that draws some and repels others. Communities have their policies, their attitudes, and a distinct individuality. According to the merits of these qualities, a community either waxes or wanes. As communities develop according to their natures, so organizations and institutions have their karma. Corrupt enterprises ultimately fail. Business that is not founded upon integrity and intelligence ultimately comes to a bad end. Many a corporation has lost its all because it tried to gain more than was its due. The tradition, the principles, the standards behind an industry determine with mathematical precision the ultimate state to which that industry shall come. 132 Reincarnation, the cycle of necessity. If we allow approximately 1,000 years as the interval between reincarnations for those not highly evolved, we shall see that the periodic reappearance of certain types of entities in the material world accounts for many of the changes and disasters that occur. In the opening years of the Christian era, the Roman Empire carried on extensive warfare largely to gratify the militaristic ambitions of the people. 1,000 years after the decline of Rome, the Crusades stand out on the pages of history. At approximately the same time, the great Mongol conquests changed the face of Asia and threatened the survival of Christendom. It is approximately 1,000 years from Genghis Khan to the World War, the greatest military upheaval of modern times. Those who believe in reincarnation accept the theory that entities entering life at regular intervals bring their dominant qualities with them to again live out their ideals. According to Plato and the Egyptians, it was karma that destroyed the continent of Atlantis. It will be interesting to observe the consistency with which such natural cataclysms as earthquakes and pestilence follow man-made war. Everywhere there is evidence that quality of action is resulting in appropriate consequence. As individuals we err and suffer. As communities and as industries we become selfish and decline. As nations we war and are impoverished. As races we fail and depart. But through this whole pageantry of the coming and going of world orders, the individual entity, the ego, or self, is growing up through experience toward reality achieved through the conquest of illusion. The divine incarnations, the doctrine of avatars, or celestial embodiments, is the principal theme of the Puranic literature of India. According to this concept, the god Vishnu occasionally incarnates for the purpose of rescuing his creations from evil or danger. There are 10 principal embodiments of Vishnu during the present Kalpa or age of the world. 9 already have transpired, and the 10th, called the White Horse Avatar, is yet to come. In each of the divine incarnations, Vishnu, taking upon himself corporeal form, performs a heroic action. Having completed his mission, the god does not die in the accepted sense of the word but retires to his true estate, from which exalted position he continues his benevolent activities for the preservation of his creatures. The Hindu mind regards the divine incarnation as a source of security and the perpetuation of the virtues. In the Bhagavad Gita, Krishna, the 8th avatar of Vishnu, is made to say, "Whenever there is decline of righteousness and uprising of unrighteousness, then project myself into creation. For the protection of the righteous and the destruction of the evildoer, and for the proper establishment of the law of righteousness, appear from age to age." There are many important parallels between the Hindu Krishna and the Syrian Christ. Fok was conceived Imaiak 133-134 Reincarnation, the Cybcle or necessity olatly, each fled from his own country to escape from an evil king who destroyed the firstborn of his kingdom. Each was a shepherd, at least symbolically. Each was deified and regarded as an intermediary between the supreme god and his earthly children. It is widely believed throughout India that Gautama Buddha was the 9th avatar, in this way tying Brahmanism and Buddhism together. The phenomenon of the rise of Buddhism was too great to be ignored, and the sanctity of Buddha's person has been accepted by many widely divergent Eastern cults. Traces of avatar worship are to be found in China, where the emperor is regarded as the son of heaven invested with the powers of his father, in Japan where the emperor's person is accepted as divine, in Egypt where the pharaohs were believed to be overshadowed by various gods, in Greece where the pagan divinities took form and wandered among men, in Rome where the emperor himself assumed divinity with the purple, among the Nordics where Odin and other members of the pantheon wandered upon the earth, assuming various disguises, and among the Mexican and Central American Indians where Quetzalcoatl was venerated as the incarnation of the spirit of the planet Venus. Avatar worship has risen in most religions through the deification of their founders. This is obvious in Christianity where the various councils and synods finally decided that Christ was identical with the Father, and therefore in Christ God actually was incarnated and lived with men. An avatar, however, should not be regarded as a reincarnating entity. It is not drawn back into life because of personal insufficiency, or that any law of evolution may be full. Tuesday Divine Incarnations 135 filled. Rather the incarnation is a gesture of divine grace, the deity, assuming human limitations and proportions, becomes the teacher, the priest, the prince, or the general in order to forward the estate of its chosen people. Therefore we may say that in essence and principle the belief in avatars denies the laws of reincarnation and karma by establishing a factor of grace or escape. By means of the avatar the people are elevated to an estate that they have not earned. In the case of Christ, the purpose of the divine incarnation has been misunderstood and eventually resulted in the teaching of the forgiveness of sin, a belief which violates all the principles of universal integrity. The moment that a doctrine of intercession is established, universal integrity is compromised. Reincarnation and karma as teachings must be interpreted as universal, impersonal, inevitable laws, or else their significance is entirely destroyed. In philosophy not even God is permitted to interfere with the workings of his own creations. Unphilosophical people, however, fearing to face immutable law, have conjured up an elaborate structure of evasion, compromise, and conceit which in the course of eyes has evolved into what we term theology, most of which is too monument to ignorance and audacity. How then shall the believer in reincarnation and karma interpret the doctrine of avatars? Obviously, the universal life which permeates all parts of the cosmic system cannot be contracted to the size and proportion of a fragile human being. The avatar is, in reality, the legitimate product of the laws of reincarnation and karma. The seer, the sage, the prophet, and the saint are products of a normal evolution. By consecration to the truths of life, certain entities have achieved a greater unfoldment than the rest. This greater 136 reincarnation, the cycle of necessity unfoldment, this fuller knowledge, results in an appropriate superiority over those less consecrated or less developed. Plato was not a miracle, but rather a proof of the working of the law. Buddha was not a transcendent being who descended from some celestial state to abide for a time with men, he was the product of the law at work in human life to perfect and illuminate mankind. The avatar then is in reality an elder brother, one who has gone before, one who has learned the lesson, and having worn out the experiences of life continues to incarnate for one purpose alone, the service and instruction of others. The final and noblest end to which men aspire is a state of rational usefulness. Having experienced all things within himself, the sage is reborn as the teacher of other men. Having conquered the world, he returns to life as would a spiritual conqueror. He is no more mysterious or strange than is a great violinist, a great physician, or a great artist, who through ages of talent and application rises above his contemporaries to a unique position in the world. The belief that God incarnates in certain persons is due to the fact that more divinity or godliness is manifested in the world through certain high types of spiritual leadership. The more that man is possessed by truth, the more he manifests of God. The great world teacher, having found more of divinity than other less evolved mortals, is accepted as a divine incarnation because the truths and laws of life are more evident in him. Soulmates. The doctrine of soulmates may be defined as the belief that at some remote time a cleavage took place in the spiritual and physical nature of man. As a result of this cleavage, no human being in itself is perfect, but must achieve perfection through union with the other half of itself. While the belief in psychic affinities has never gained general favor, there are several small groups in Europe and America commit to the idea. Personal affection is the most difficult of all human emotions to rationalize. For thousands of years human beings have fallen in love, but no philosopher has ever been able to give a full and complete definition of love. The Platonic schools held to a doctrine of complements. They believed that man, striving after perfection, found in woman the virtues which he himself did not possess, or if he did possess them, they existed only as potentialities. Those unable to understand the more abstract phases of Greek philosophy misinterpreted the opinions of these great thinkers and fell into the illusion of affinities. Instead of realizing that each human being is essentially complete and perfect, they separated the male and female nature into two objective personalities, dedicating each to the quest of the other. From a philosophical standpoint, such a belief is untenable and finds no place in a universe ruled over by the laws 137-138 reincarnation, the cycle of necessity of reincarnation and karma. The doctrine of affinities is merely a cast-off and rejected notion belonging to the childhood of human thought when the minds of men were groping toward solutions to the mysteries of personal existence. It is becoming more obvious daily that man is the most complex of all the natural creations which inhabit our earth. The entity or ego from which the personality of man is emanated is asexual, that is, neither male nor female but of a neutral quality containing both male and female natures in a state of suspension. The entity, therefore, is capable of emanating either male or female personalities at will, but is limited by the qualities of neither. The doctrine of reincarnation teaches that there is a tendency for the personality to alternate its sex according to a set pattern within the entity itself. The entity which manifests as male in one incarnation may manifest as female in the next, or there may be several lives in one sex pattern, and then several in the opposite. Each entity in the course of evolution will incarnate in an equal number of bodies of each sex, thus achieving a manifestation of all the powers which are resident in the entity itself. The doctrine of reincarnation and karma, by affirming the completeness of each entity, destroys the entire supposition upon which the doctrine of soulmates is based. Man is not wandering around in space looking for the rest of himself. He is evolving the various aspects of his nature from within himself. When he has unfolded all of his latent powers, he will require no other complement, but in his imperfect state he finds in the relationship of marriage a symbolical completeness and an opportunity to further unfold his own latent completeness. Soulmates 139. Some believers in soulmates have accepted a form of belief in reincarnation. They assume that the two parts have been born many times in the quest of each other, and only when they meet and mingle has the purpose of existence been fulfilled. Experience proves, however, that with most modern believers the teaching of affinities is a form of wishful thinking arising from emotional immaturity. Unfortunately, most people have had great difficulty in determining with certainty the true identity of their severed self. The result is that the believer proceeds along the path of trial and error. One optimist whom I knew personally has been a 5-time loser. Each time he fondly believed that he had discovered the rest of himself, and each time it turned out to be the rest of somebody else. Nor is this a unique case, but a common state of affairs among those who are questing a field for that which must inevitably be found within themselves. There has been some conspiracy by which psychism has been induced on occasion to support the belief in soulmates. Ouija board, table tipping, and slate messages have been advanced to clinch the doctrine of affinities. Psychic phenomena notwithstanding, the believers in soulmates are still walking up and down the earth vainly seeking for their elusive counterparts. The doctrine of rebirth and compensation is not only vastly nobler than the concept of soulmates but is established upon a much sounder interpretation of the laws of life. Evolution is impelling all men toward reality. Reincarnation and karma, as the instruments by which evolution achieves its ends, protect the integrity factor so that growth is possible only through normalcy and honesty. 140 Reincarnation, the cycle of necessity. For hundreds of millions of years man has been evolving upward through the forms of nature, preparing himself to receive the power of mind that through thought he might solve other mysteries. At a remote time long gone by, man was physically androgynous, as are certain primitive animals even to this time, possessing both of life's polarities within himself. Later, as mind began to develop and intellection required more and more of life's vital energies, The process of evolution decreed that in each human being one of the sexual poles be submerged and its energies devoted to mental activity. From that time on the entities have formed bodies, either male or female, submerging in each the qualities of its opposite. To compensate for this submergence, the institution of marriage was established, not because marriage is a spiritual mystery that is to survive the dissolution of the body, but because it is an association necessary to the perpetuation of future bodies, and psychologically necessary to convey the sense of normalcy or completeness. The submerged nature is compensated for by another person, in whom the opposite polarity is physically dominant. Therefore it is a mistake for any person to regard marriage as more than an association of two persons, each entirely complete in itself, immortal in its own right, but drawn together as physical, emotional, and mental complements, and through this association helping to bring about the unfoldment of its own submerged parts. Memory of past lives. Whenever the subject of reincarnation is discussed, there is always someone who wants to know why he cannot remember his previous incarnation, that is, of course, if he ever did live here before. The absence of a remembrance of former lives seems to be the principal objection to the acceptance of the doctrine of rebirth. Reincarnation is the periodic manifestation on the physical plane of an invisible spiritual entity. To make this manifestation possible, the entity sends out from itself body principles which become the rudiments of bodies, and about which the corporeal structure is built. When the body has been completed, the invisible subjective entity manifests through the body, using it as a medium of action and experience. When the stress and strain of physical existence has broken down the fabric of the body, the entity withdraws its principles, and the body dies. We shall call this body person number 1. At death, the consciousness absorbs into itself the attitudes, opinions, ideas, convictions, and conclusions of person number 1. The disintegration of the body taking place according to the proper laws of nature, person number 1 then ceases to exist. Nor can person number 1 ever be resurrected or restored to the state of existence. After an appropriate length of time, the entity sends out its form principles again, builds 141-142 reincarnation, the cycle of necessity, a new body, and functions through it, resulting in the creation of person number 2. There is no direct connection of any kind between person number 1 and person number 2. Both have been emanated from the entity which is immortal and will continue to send out similar personalities over an immense period of time. The brain of person number 1 has entirely disintegrated and is in no way connected with the brain of person number 2. The experiences of person number 1 have become part of the conscious evolution of the entity which emanated person number 1. Technically, therefore, person number 1 has ceased, its experiences have lost their individuality and become part of the growth of the immortal entity. Person number 2 contains in its very fabric the experiences of person number 1, but as these experiences have become impersonalized and assimilated by the entity, they come forward as character, personality, temperament, and to a degree, body structure. Person number 2 has no way of proving that person number 1 ever existed, nor has person number 2 any remembrance of what happened to person number 1. Yet person number 2 contains within itself the assimilated experience of person number 1 and is enriched thereby. After fulfilling its life expectancy, person number 2 is likewise allowed to die. The entity, withdrawing its life principle, adds the experience of person number 2 to its collective growth, and after an appropriate period of time projects person number 3, which has no way of knowing that person number 1 and person number 2 ever existed. This process continues for approximately 800 lives in our human cycle. The various bodies or memory of past lives. 143 persons cannot remember the previous forms which the entity emanated. This record remains in the entity, and according to Buddhist philosophy it is only when one of the personalities achieves conscious union with the entity through illumination that the sequence of past lives, known only to the entity and not to any other body, may be perceived. The exceptions to natural order are twofold. First, when the personality dies prematurely through some accident, the entity may project a new physical personality without building a new mental and emotional nature. Thus in the case of children who die before adolescence there is sometimes a memory of previous existence. Second, a sensitive nature may give the personality a slight or occasional flash of contact with the entity, resulting in a momentary glimpse of the conditions of some previous existence. These, like other occasional abnormal signs which occur in nature, are related to karma, pointing out some extraordinary factor in the destiny. For the mass of mankind, however, there should be no memory of previous existences except in the form of specialized abilities such as the infant prodigy or certain peculiarities which have been superficially attributed to heredity. In Oriental countries it is regarded as singularly unfortunate to have any memory of a previous life for the reason that it indicates that some part of the superphysical nature is out of adjustment and an early death frequently follows. The philosopher approaches the subject of reincarnation not to be convinced by the memory of some previous circumstance, but because of the fundamental rationality and integrity of the teaching. The true thinker is more interested in the integrity factor of a belief than he is in an effort to demonstrate that belief through some physical phenomena. 144 Reincarnation, the cycle of necessity. For example, the greater part of humanity believes in the immortality of the human soul, but the majority is content to accept the belief without effort to prove it. Only a few strive to talk with the dead or invoke the shades of the past. The human mind accepts immortality as necessary to its orientation. Proof is not required. In the same way reincarnation and karma appeal to the normal mind because of their reasonableness and the absolute justice which they represent. The average person realizes that it is impossible to learn in one life all that it is possible to know. The mind therefore finds little difficulty in accepting the belief that we live more than once. The individual, surrounded by obvious disasters, finds it difficult to reconcile the apparent injustices of life with the concept of a benevolent and all-loving God. The doctrine of karma, which explains misery without making the universe dishonest, is acceptable to minds which long have contemplated the apparent unfairness of the material state. These seekers after honesty do not require a vision of some previous existence to convert them to a philosophy which obviously is honest and just. We stated earlier that the experience of the previous life has its part in the molding of the new personality. It then appears natural that an entity which has created several personalities for a specific achievement should leave the stamp of this achievement on subsequent bodies. An example is the American who devotes his life to the study of Egyptology, being more at home with Egyptian antiquities than with his own contemporary world. In the same category is the child orchestra leader, the 9-year-old violinist, and the small boy who plays the piano superbly before his fingers are long enough to span the octave. Such cases are evidences memory of past lives. 145 of memories of past lives interpreted through abilities rather than remembrances. We are living in the light of the past whether we know about it or not. Nor is it fair to say that no one has remembered his past lives. In earlier sections of this book we have mentioned several great and noble persons who remembered clearly exploits from their previous incarnations. If a careful check were to be made, the findings on this subject would convince the skeptic that there is considerable documentation possible on the subject of previous incarnations. The difficulty, however, is that there is no way of proving these incarnations except in very rare instances. But we believe many things that we have not proved nor understood. We have never proved the existence of heaven or hell, but millions of nominal Christians have the most explicit convictions on the subject. Nor do we deny electricity because we have not been able to give it an adequate definition. The world is filled with unproved acceptances which environment and tradition have sanctified. Many of these we never question. If we did, they would collapse. Reincarnation is as provable as most theological beliefs, and far more easily demonstrated from a rational viewpoint than the majority of our religious convictions. To approach a modern materialistic objection, reincarnation is accused of being the product of wishful thinking, an escape mechanism from reality. Some of the moderns rather sneeringly refer to reincarnation as the triumph of procrastination, implying that it impoverishes the present through hope of the future. With a gesture of pity, the doctrine of reincarnation is cast aside as unprovable and intolerable by a group of intellectuals who have never proved anything. 146 Reincarnation, the cycle or necessity. To these objections we can only say that all forms of knowledge can be abused, both belief and unbelief can be equally dangerous. But up to the present time no truly great contribution has been made to the history of knowledge by any individual who did not believe in something nobler than himself. Reincarnation can be an escape mechanism, but so can materiality, which promises oblivion at the end of error. Reincarnation can be wishful thinking, but so can the hope of heaven to the average individual. Reincarnation and karma are philosophical doctrines. They can be applied rationally only by reasonable people. Truths of any kind in the keeping of the unenlightened are perverted and misused. Reincarnation does not depend for its acceptance upon proof that we have lived before, but upon proof that we must live many times again if we ever hope to be human, or achieve even a small part of the good of which we dream. Shanti Devi. Authentic accounts of the memory of past lives, though rare, are occasionally to be met with. These accounts cannot be explained by imagination or wishful thinking, neither can telepathy be advanced to explain away the mystery. The facts remain, let the savant deal with them as he will. A word about the neo-Orientalist and pseudo-metaphysicians who imagine themselves to be the re-embodiments of Julius Caesar, Alexander the Great, or Napoleon. Curiously enough, Hypatia is a general favorite. For several years there was a standing feud between two distinguished ladies, each of whom insisted that she was the re-embodiment of Hypatia. It is obvious that the elaborate claims to descent from aristocratic pre-existences are a mental and emotional autocorrectivism devised by the unimportant to excuse the uselessness of their present lives. After eliminating vain pretensions, certain cases remain inexplicable according to our present conceits concerning man's future estate. You can explain away foolishness, but you cannot explain away facts. Nor is it possible to deny that in some instances the belief in reincarnation has strengthened the mind to its present tasks and contributed a great measure of well-being and security. 147–148 Reincarnation, the cycle or necessity. Take for example the case of Decider Makrimazaros, the distinguished Hungarian painter, whose ability intrigued the late Maxim Gorky, who bought many of his pictures. Makrimazaros paints various prehistoric scenes which he claims to remember from various incarnations in remote time. In his own words, "The memory of the mammoth I used to fear then has come back to me crystal clear. I knew the face of the earth when it was barely cooled off from the volcanic age. And memories of a still earlier incarnation as a dweller in the underworld of another planet supply me with subjects for my brush and pencil." Many will differ with Mr. Makrimazaros by applying common sense to his explanation. Some will say that he was a shrewd publicizer of his own works, others that he visited some museum of natural history, a few more generous will decide that he dreamed his subject matter. But who among the doubters can say with certainty that this Hungarian gentleman has not lived before, and which of his critics can disprove his memory of ancient times? In Paris at the beginning of the present century lived a certain Madame Laure Reynaud. From childhood this lady distinctly remembered that she had lived before and was able to give an accurate description of a previous home and the conditions surrounding her death. When Madame Reynaud was 45 years of age she traveled for the first time to Italy, where she was able to recognize the scenes of her previous life. She was in Genoa when she described the type of house in which she had lived. With the aid of a friend she located the house and made a statement subject to historical *. New York Times, February 9, 1930. Shanti Devi. 149 Verification. She said that in her previous life she had not been buried in the cemetery, but in a particular church some distance away. Research proved that a young lady answering Madame Reynaud's description of her previous self had died in the house on October 21, 1809, and had been buried in the church which Madame Reynaud had indicated. It is a far cry from Italy to Burma, but the belief in the doctrine of reincarnation long ago established itself in the most distant parts of the earth. In an article on transmigration, with special references to Burma, we find the following: in Buddhist countries, it is no very unusual thing to have children gravely claiming to have had such and such a name, and to have lived in such and such a place, in their previous lives, and occasionally these claims are in a sort of fashion substantiated. Such children are in Burma called winzas, and it is no uncommon thing for a sort of rough test to be carried out by taking a winza to the scene of his former life, when it is said that he or she can generally identify his former dwelling and friends, and can state facts known only to the dead person and one other living man. These winzas are so relatively frequent in Burma that their existence is commonly taken for granted. The power of remembering the past life is generally stated to disappear as the child grows up, though we have met adult winzas who still claim to remember the past. Plus asterisk Ludislawski quoting Charles Lancelin, La Vie posthume, Paris, 1922, and Gabriel Delaunay, Documents pour servir à l'étude de la réincarnation, Paris, 1924. Plus Buddhism, December, 1903. p. 307. 150 Reincarnation, the cycle of necessity. The outstanding account in modern times relating to the memory of past lives is the story of the young Hindu girl Shanti Devi. The facts of her story have been carefully checked by men of the highest character, including Lala Deshbandhu Gupta, managing director of the Daily Taj, the leading newspaper of Delhi, N.R. Sharma, leader of the National Congress Party of India and a close associate of Mahatma Gandhi, and T.C. Mathur, a leading attorney of Delhi. These men, with many others, have issued a report on their findings in which they conclude that the story of Shanti Devi is not only entirely genuine but one of the most remarkable records of the remembrance of a previous life ever witnessed and documented. In her early childhood Shanti Devi spoke but little, being a very introspective child. After her 4th year she began referring directly to the incidents of her previous life, frequently comparing details of her present state with similar details of her former incarnation. She insisted that she was a Koban by caste, explaining that her husband was a cloth merchant. She described in detail her previous home, the arrangements of the rooms, and even the color of the house. At first the parents took little notice, attributing her statements to a make-believe world of her own imagining. Later, however, they became worried because of the prevalent belief that a child who remembers its past life will die young. Shanti Devi frequently expressed her desire to visit the town of Mutra some distance away. It was here, according to her statements, that she had lived in her former life. For some time she declined to tell the name of her former husband, due to the native custom of extreme modesty. At last Shanti Devi 151, a grand-uncle, Mr. Bishan Chand, a teacher in the Ramjas school, promised to take her to Mutra if she would whisper to him the name of her previous husband. She agreed and said that the name was P.T. Kedarnath Jabet. Later a letter was sent to this man according to an address given by Shanti Devi. To the general amazement of all concerned, Jabet answered the letter, stating emphatically that the story told by the girl was substantially true. Soon after, P.T. Kedarnath Jabet, who had Remar Ride, came to Delhi and was immediately recognized by Shanti Devi as her husband. He asked her several intimate questions. Her replies were correct, and Kedarnath declared that it seemed to him as though his dead wife were speaking. In the next few days Shanti Devi spent considerable time describing the town of Mutra, and the special temple which she had frequently visited, even going so far as to say that she had promised 100 rupees to the temple and had the necessary money buried under the floor of her home at Mutra. As the result of continued insistence on the girl's part, a party of 15 made the trip to Mutra with her. Arriving at the station she described certain changes in the structure. She was put into a carriage and the driver was directed to follow her commands. She instructed the driver how to reach the holy gate, and showed complete familiarity with the environment. When the carriage could proceed no further because of the narrow street, she guided the party into a narrow lane. Here she met an old Brahmin whom she immediately recognized as her father-in-law. She then led the party directly to the house which she had described 152 Reincarnation, the CYRCLE of necessity from early childhood. Even though it had been repainted in a different color, she had no difficulty in recognizing it. As they entered, several specific questions were put to her concerning the arrangement of the rooms, closets, and so forth. She answered all correctly, appearing entirely at home in the house which she regarded as her proper home. She was taken to the temple, where she became insistent that she make the offering of 100 rupees. She insisted on showing the party of 15 where she had hidden the money in another house, the one in which she had died. This turned out to be the home of Kedarnath's family. She entered the small room and indicated a certain corner, asserting that the money she had buried before dying had been put in that place. A hole was dug, and about a foot below the surface was found an arrangement for keeping valuables, but it was empty. Shanti Devi became quite excited, insisting that she had left the money there. Later, Kedarnath acknowledged that he had found the money and had removed it after his wife's death. This circumstance precludes the possibility that she had been reading Kedarnath's mind. She then went to the house of her previous parents, who still lived and whom she immediately identified out of a group of more than 50 persons. She then embraced them, called them by name, and performed the customary courtesies of child to parent. Another important point was the dialectic difference between Delhi and Mathura. Shanti Devi used the idiom familiar to Mathura before she had even been to the city, and on her visit there appeared obviously to belong to that community. Shant Devi 153. At the end of the unusual journey, an open-air meeting was held for the public in the compound of a local high school. Here more than 10,000 persons gathered, many of whom had seen some part of the girl's behavior. All who attended were profoundly interested and impressed, and requested that Shanti Devi be left with them. The parents of her present life, however, felt it would be better if she returned to Delhi. On the return train trip, Shanti Devi insisted that she should have been left at Mathura with her friends, relatives, and husband, and after fretting over this matter for some time and insisting that she was grown up in spite of her 11 years, at last grew weary and fell asleep. The story of Shanti Devi presents numerous problems to both the Orthodox Christian and the Orthodox scientist. There is no knowledge now generally disseminated through our institutions of learning that can explain or interpret this extraordinary case. The story was widely publicized during 1937, and a number of learned men attempted to find a rational solution. The fact remains that reincarnation is the only reasonable solution. To deny it would be to bestow upon Shanti Devi extraordinary occult powers, the existence of which science also denies. Reincarnation, therefore, is not only sustained by the testimony of the reason, authority, and tradition, but by the actual evidence of persons who not only affirm that they have lived before but are able to prove their statements. If one person can prove that he has lived before, then man's whole concept of life is changed. He is no longer limited by the narrow confines of a single existence. He need no longer live for the now alone. The realization of 154 reincarnation, the psyche of necessity. The truth of reincarnation bestows upon the human being not only the realization of his immortality but of his kinship with the ages. He is part of all that has been, is, or ever shall be. If men were as loyal to truth as they are devoted to their own opinions, the case of Shanti Devi would reveal a new purpose in life and a new reason for the achievement of all that is great and all that is good. The after-death state. The belief in the continuity of consciousness after death is common to all great world religions. The human mind, contemplating the mystery of its own origin, rejects as untenable the concept of complete dissolution. The pre-Homeric Greeks were content to view the future state as a ghostly existence spent in subterranean caverns. The dynastic Egyptians developed the opinion that the blessed land of the ossorified dead was a more or less faithful representation of physical community existence. The dwellers in Amenti continued to practice their earthly occupations, and Egyptian art depicts the abode of the departed as a pleasant sphere of temples, gardens, fountains, and palaces. It is now believed that the widespread superstition that the shadow land or underworld was beneath the earth arose from the custom of burying the dead in crypts, caverns, under mounds, and in pyramids. There are many mythological accounts of the shadows of the dead gathering to feast in their funeral chambers beneath the earth. It was the classical Greek civilization that gave to the modern world the concept of punishment and reward after death. The Greeks, however, always adjusted the punishment to meet the offense, and the reward to meet the virtue. It never occurred to them that any form of punishment or compensation should be eternal. It remained for the early 155-156 reincarnation, the cycle of necessity church fathers to make theology an element of virtue and to populate perdition with heretics. It is a definite relief, after 19 centuries of belief in an orthodox conception of heaven and hell, to realize that the laws of reincarnation and karma are the true keys to the mysteries of life and death. The East Indian philosophies point to centuries of research and thought. To them physical life is but a small part of existence. These Eastern sages have divided the invisible universe into numerous spheres and planes, each appropriately titled, and all together revealing the mysterious framework of universal laws which sustain the worlds, both visible and invisible. The reincarnationist recognizes that his personality is suspended from an immortal principle, and that while these personalities may pass through the processes of integration and disintegration, the spiritual nature remains untouched by physical life or death. The after-death state is merely the process of gradually disintegrating the personality. The personality is composed of 4 parts: the physical body, the etheric body, the emotional body, and the mental body. Each of these bodies is an organism created for the purpose of manifesting the thoughts, feelings, energies, and form principles of the entity. The mere disintegration of the physical body at death does not result in the immediate dissolution of the personality which, though invisible to the physical perceptions, still continues to exist on the emotional and mental levels. Not until the mental body is finally disintegrated does the personality cease to exist. Consider the case of Mr. Smith. He has a personality made up of his opinions, his reactions, his attitudes, his Tuesday or death state 157 position, and his appearance. When Mr. Smith dies he merely drops off his physical body, but he still is Mr. Smith manifesting the same dispositional and temperamental peculiarities. The fact that he has no physical body prevents his functioning on the material plane, but in no way affects the function of his mind or his emotions. It requires considerable time, from 150 to 300 years, for Mr. Smith's emotional nature to be disintegrated. This disintegration can take place only after the emotional experiences of the personality have been transferred to the entity to become a permanent record. But still Mr. Smith remains, because his mental individuality survives the disintegration of his emotional nature. The length of mental survival differs definitely with various individuals. The average duration at the present time is about 500 years. During this period the individuality slowly dies out, and the mental records are transferred to the entity. It is only when the mental nature of the personality has entirely disintegrated that Mr. Smith utterly ceases to exist. When the mental nature has been dissolved only the permanent entity remains. After the dissolution is complete the entity begins the creation of a new personality which must pass through the same cycle and ultimately be dissolved at the end of its personalized existence. The normal personality, therefore, survives from 1,000 to 1,200 years, although the physical body of that personality may only live 60 or 70 years. The conditions of the personality in the after-death state have been variously symbolized in different religious systems. Even the Christian concept, being derived from ancient pagan 158 reincarnation, the cycle of necessity sources, should be understood symbolically rather than leader-ally. The descriptions of heaven and hell are merely highly colored accounts of the incidents through which the personality passes in its slow process of disintegration. According to its merits or demerits the personality suffers karma, usually depicted as some form of infernal torture. During the period of its physical life the personality absorbs into itself certain knowledge and experience. After death this knowledge is transferred to the higher parts of the personality, that is, the mind and the emotions. Here the process of the assimilation of experience takes place. The alchemists called this distillation. The substance or essence of experience, refined by karma, then becomes part of the permanent entity, and the personality has completed its purpose of existence. Let us now follow Mr. Smith through the process of decarnation. Having reached an age when his faculties and abilities are limited by the infirmities of his physical body, he is ready for the transition from an objective to a subjective state. At death, therefore, his center of awareness is withdrawn from the physical body, which dies, removing with it the entire mechanism of external contact. From that time on, Mr. Smith lives within himself rather than in any place. He is his own world, and no longer are there windows into any objective sphere. The center of awareness is placed in his emotional nature, with the result that his own nature becomes to him a world, rich or poor, noble or ignoble, according to his emotional estate during his physical existence. Usually, however, Mr. Smith is not aware that the world in which he is living is himself. This is why certain psychics, Tuesday are death state 159, having achieved a measure of emotional clairvoyance, bring back contradictory accounts of things they presumably have seen in the other world. By a mysterious fourth-dimensional process, the entity functioning on the emotional plane after death is living within his own feelings, and though he appears to see a world about him, he is seeing only himself. The various destructive emotions which dominated him during his physical life now become part of this internal landscape. The law of karma sets in, and the personality goes through various conditions and places which, like dream symbols, are merely the objectification of his emotions, desires, and passions. Gradually this emotional scene changes. The personality feels that it is going to some distant place. But the change or journey is entirely within the self. The higher emotions now find their place. This condition, therefore, is heaven, not a place, but merely an emotional mood through which the personality is passing. At last feeling dies out, the pictures fade away because the symbols themselves have been solved. The personality then shifts its focus to the mental nature, and the emotional body dies out almost imperceptibly. The personality now functions in a sphere of mental pictures, that is, it lives within its own field of thought. These mental pictures, like dreams and nightmares, also assume strange and fantastic patterns. The personality is involved in these patterns, and through the imposition of karma must live out its own thinking. All this time Mr. Smith is still Mr. Smith. Preserving his sense of identity, Mr. Smith moves as a person through the symbol patterns of his own emotional nature. And later, still Mr. Smith, he moves through the symbol patterns 160 reincarnation, the cycle of necessity of his mental nature. His sense of self-existence remains until the mental patterns die out. After having worked out his lower mental complexes, and having built the experience into the permanent entity, Mr. Smith enters the abstract or higher mental state. Then for the first time, Mr. Smith becomes aware of the fact that he himself is beginning to fade out. This awareness generally comes in a manner corresponding to sleep. Mr. Smith, the highest link in the chain of personality, having completed his experiences within his own mental nature, slowly goes to sleep. From this sleep Mr. Smith never awakes. Mr. Smith now is through with the cycle of his life. The only record that remains of him is preserved in the permanent entity, but he never lives again. Thus at the end of each incarnation there comes a period of impersonality when the entity itself alone remains. As soon as the entity has been completely posited, that is when the personality is entirely absorbed, it begins the preparation for its next personality. When this personality is reborn it may be named Miss Jones. Miss Jones will pass through the same cycle, except on a slightly higher level because the experiences of Mr. Smith, having become part of the entity, have enriched it, and therefore improved the next personality which the entity objectifies. Because the personality in its after-death state functions in its own emotional and mental body, its condition follows closely its expectation. The dead Egyptian expected to see Osiris. His expectancy became a thought pattern, and he saw Osiris. In the same way the Christian will see Christ, the Buddhist will see Buddha, and the Brahmin will enter the expected palace of Indra. The death state 161 in the sphere of subtle substance where emotional and mental impulse instantaneously produces any patterns desired, each personality meets what it expects to meet and experiences what it expects to experience. A materialist who firmly believes that he will have no consciousness after death may continue indefinitely in an unconscious state because he has so decreed it, but karma will ultimately break through. It is a little difficult to clarify the idea of functioning within yourself, that is, moving about in your own sphere of thought and emotion. But in the subjective planes it is quite possible. This is why the yogi in meditation is warned by his teacher to preserve his absolute fixity of purpose, otherwise he will fall into the illusions of his own desires and may not be able to extricate himself during that life. The French transcendentalists referred to the sphere of emotional patterns as the astral light, which takes any form that is willed, yet is none of these forms. Wandering afield in its own imaginings, the personality loses its one-pointedness. To prevent this, the Tibetans recite to their dying priests the words of wisdom. And in the early Christian church the sacraments were performed to ensure consecration of purpose in this world and in the world to come. The after-death state of the other kingdoms of nature may be inferred from their lack of superior vehicles. The animal is capable of only emotional experience after death. This is primitive, but consistent with the rudimentary emotional instincts of the animal. For this reason Mohammed declared that some animals could enter heaven, heaven here being used merely as a collective term for the entire after-death state. The mystery schools warn their disciples to moderate their emotional extremes and normalize their mental incan 162 reincarnation, the cycle of necessity stand size. This was in order that in the after-death state the personality might not be depressed by its own emotional and mental environment, the theory being that if the emotions and thoughts were normal the after-death state would be normal, and there would be no karmic misery in the sphere of illusion. The laws governing reincarnation is controlled primarily by the law of karma, a manifestation of the universal law of cause and effect. The personality is subject to the various laws governing thought, emotion, energy, and form. For this reason it was never possible for the personality to escape the consequences set up by actions in the various substances of which bodies are composed. In the Gnostic school the permanent entity is called anthropo, or the man. The incarnating ego which is emanated by the entity is designated anthropo, son of anthropo, the man that is the son of the man. The ego is called by the Neoplatonists the summit of the personality, the self which endures for the span of one life. In Gnosticism the cycle of necessity is set forth clearly as a process of emanations. The permanent entity emanates the impermanent ego. The ego in turn emanates its bodies. Through these bodies the ego contacts phenomenal experience which it preserves in memory, which memory record ultimately is returned to the permanent entity through the process of decarnation or death. Thus the anthropo, or Emerson's oversoul, the greater self, grows through the experiences of these lesser natures which at 164 reincarnation, the cycle of necessity emanates. The permanent entity is slowly coming of age by a process requiring hundreds of millions of years. The entity itself never incarnates. It merely projects the forms from itself. In Tibetan art the permanent entity is frequently depicted as seated upon a lotus throne in a posture of contemplation. Below this throne the messengers of the meditating one, small figures mounted on racing horses, are galloping to the four corners of the world. Each of the horsemen represents an incarnation or a cycle of experience. In the midst of the racing horses the entity itself remains, impersonal, detached, in no way perturbed by the confusion of its personalities. In Christian terminology the entity is appropriately referred to as the Father in heaven. In Eastern theology it is termed the Father-Mother, because it is the true parent of the personality and each man's personal God. Prayer is the effort of an enlightened personality to contact its own source, not some abstract God in space, but its own peculiar God, its own transcendental entity. The permanent self or entity is therefore the God of the wise, to be approached with reverence and with the offerings of virtue and enlightenment. The law of karma is the law of cause and effect applied to the personalities emanating from permanent entities. It is the force constantly impelling personalities to higher courses of action. It works through the principle of inadequacy. That which is insufficient cannot survive. There is therefore a constant urge toward equilibrium and progress. According to the Zohar, unbalanced forces perish in the void. This explains the disappearance of races, types, and kinds, and also why all that is imperfect must fade from the earth. The laws governing reincarnation 165. All perfection is relative. Ultimates are beyond the conception of personalities. The law of karma is forcing life along the path of evolution by making present inadequacy unbearable. This is the fundamental impulse by which the universe is forcing the gradual but inevitable adjustment between personality and entity. When this adjustment is complete, the entity no longer emanates personalities as we know them, but emanates higher and, to us, intangible and unknowable types. The principal laws governing reincarnation, that is, the aspects of karma identified with rebirth, are as follows. 1. The length of the life cycle of the personality varies with the degrees of attunement between the personality and the permanent entity. In the primitive savage, the complete personality cycle, including physical life and after-death personal consciousness, may not exceed 100 years. This is because there is little individualized emotion and practically no reflective thought. A philosopher such as Plato or Pythagoras, whose mental accomplishments were prodigious and who lived on a very high level of personal conduct, may have a personality cycle of 10,000 years, or due to difficulty in finding an appropriate environment for the succeeding personality, even greater periods of time may pass. The reasonable expectancy for the normal person is a personality continuity of from 800 to 1200 years. There are exceptions to this rule, however. The permanent entity, making use of a higher discretion than ordinary mortals are capable of, may project a new personality at will, or whenever an appropriate environment presents itself. 166. Reincarnation, the cycle of NECS Re 2. The Mendelian law of heredity as applied to human beings is a seeming rather than an actual fact. The entity projecting a personality selects an environment suitable to the spiritual achievements, mental, emotional, and physical requirements, and karmic responsibilities which are to be exemplified in the new personality. Racial differentiations, body refinement, and predisposition to certain peculiarities of temperament and health, are important factors. Therefore the son resembles the father not because he has inherited from his parents, but because his father's personality was the principal element in a chemistry which offered certain specialized opportunities to the incarnating personality. It is now generally acknowledged that the majority of diseases cannot be inherited, but rather a deficiency may be inherited which will cause susceptibility. This deficiency once due to the fact that the incoming personality, depending upon the parents for the substance of its physical body, must assume whatever chemical deficiencies are peculiar to this substance. The childhood environment is a powerful determining factor in the life of the personality. This environment is due to the temperaments, characteristics, qualities, and abilities of the parent. Also such factors as wealth and poverty become forces in character. As a result of the entity's selection of a location for the personality's incarnation, the entity assures itself that the personality will pass through certain experiences peculiarly necessary to the balanced development of the entity. Thus the entity grows up by benefiting from the experiences of its personalities. 3. Under certain conditions of sickness or stress the personality may become mentally unbalanced. There are also cases of mental subnormality, including the Moron and Tuesday laws governing reincarnation. 167. The idiot. Physical deformities also are quite possible and must be considered in relation to the personality's experience necessity. Insanity, as a maladjustment between the mental nature and the other parts of the personality chain, has no permanent effect upon either the ego or the permanent entity. The only detrimental element is the loss of experience over a period of years. But this in turn is karmic, and is part of the necessary spiritual experience of the entity. The moron and the idiot are usually the result of physical subnormalities which prevent the ego from functioning through the body. In other words, the body has its emotional and vital principles, but because the body fabric is not sensitive to mental impulses, normalcy cannot be expected. Accidents and deformities are frequently checks on personalities that would otherwise develop uncontrollable and undesirable traits. The accident is a direct result of karma, either of the personality itself or of the entity. As the sole purpose of the personality is to enrich the permanent entity, such peculiarities as deformity, stuttering, and other lesser abnormalities are all media for the working out of the karmic inadequacies of the entity. For the law of alternation of sexes in rebirth is necessary for the spiritual completeness of the entity. This law is subject to numerous modifications, but in substance holds true over a long period of time. The evidence of the working of this law is the steady breaking down of the extreme difference between the sexes. The caveman and the fluttery female are rapidly disappearing. Men are increasing their interest in music and art and other cultural things anciently regarded as distinctly feminine, while woman's sphere has 168 reincarnation. The psyche of necessity increased to include business, politics, and professions previously considered distinctly masculine. When this increased sphere of influence is achieved without the loss of fundamental impulses, we see the evidence of universal law bringing all life toward equilibrium. The only way we can learn to live is by living, and through hundreds of lives we gradually dignify the art of living. In this way the entity perfects itself in the mysteries of physical existence in which the entity has no actual contact, depending entirely upon its personalities for the development of itself. Suicide. The Alexandrian mystics, basing their opinions upon the teachings of the immortal Plato, recognized two forms of death. The first, normal death, was the result of the soul's departure from the body, that is, the personality retired from its objective physical state. The second form of death occurred when the body was violently separated from the soul by self-destruction. Among the Greeks, suicide was exonerated under certain extreme conditions, but was rejected as a means of solving or attempting to solve the normal problems of life. Olympiodorus declared suicide to be permissible to preserve the secrets of the mysteries or to protect the soul from dishonor. He also condoned it in the advanced stages of an incurable ailment. This matter has been revived lately in the medical controversy over the subject of mercy killing. A distinction has always been made between suicide and violent death due to accidental means or war. This is because accidents and war are included in the karmic fate of the personality. But suicide is never regarded as karmic. It is an action of self-will against the self. It has been observed that the complexities of modern civilization have increased the suicidal tendency. Men and women, lacking the strength, courage, or vision to live well, have hoped for oblivion beyond the grave. Suicide is very rare among PEO 169-170 reincarnation, the cycle of necessity. Please who believe in reincarnation, and when it occurs is due to a conflict of religious belief, as in Japan where Arakiri or the honorable death is the product of indigenous Shintoism rather than imported Buddhism. The average modern who resorts to suicide is impelled either by a boredom with physical life or by the fear of the consequences of action. In both cases the security which is sought beyond the grave fails utterly, and only bad karma results. The most usual karmic result of suicide is that a future personality will die under conditions where the desire for life will be the greatest. There is no escape from insufficiency except self-improvement. Religio-philosophical systems have agreed that suicide is a sin degrading in the eyes of the living the person who commits the act. The rather feudal law against suicide which exists in many countries, fails because it has no means of catching up with the departing personality. Spiritual education, and not legislation, must correct the self-destructive tendency in those who fear life. According to the esoteric traditions, the individual who commits suicide enters into a condition of being neither alive nor dead. In the play Outward Bound, the two suicides are called halfways. They cannot go back, and they cannot go on. The law of karma has been outraged, and this law is as effective in the invisible worlds as it is on the visible plane. The suicide must wait in this middle distance twixt heaven and earth until the expiration of the time which his life pattern had indicated as his normal life expectancy. As the incidents which normally would have occurred could not take place after suicide has been committed, The interval of suicide 171 years, during which the personality remains a halfway one's wasted as far as the evolutionary process is concerned. The effect of this is to shorten the after-death state of the personality unless the suicide is committed in very advanced years. The college boy who commits suicide through boredom with the world of which he is a part has comparatively little after-death consciousness. He has developed neither his emotions nor his thoughts to a degree of maturity. He remains earthbound until the time when his death would have normally occurred, and then his personality is rapidly dissolved as there is little possibility of transferring rational experience to the entity. The psychic toxin of suicide, however, enters into the fabric of the entity, and it affects the normalcy of the next personality. Of course, suicide has no permanent effect upon the evolution of the spiritual entity. It is merely an incident which is contrary to natural law, and therefore causes a powerful karmic reaction over a limited time. In the case of Socrates drinking the hemlock, the physical circumstances are not very different from suicide. In fact, Socrates would have been released upon the payment of a small fine which his friends cheerfully offered to pay. Plato, being a man of some means, tried in every way to induce Socrates to continue his life. But the great skeptic declared that by paying the fine he would admit guilt, and by admitting guilt would compromise the ideals which were more important than life. He would violate not only the highest ideals of philosophy but would cast reflection upon the gods. He therefore chose death, and was executed according to the law of his time. 172 Reincarnation, the cycle or necsry. The Greek philosopher would not regard this as suicide because the motive was entirely impersonal, and because he did it to protect the most sacred of human institutions, the body of learning. If his reasons had been personal, he probably would have found no place in the memory of the Greeks. The same attitude is held in cases of martyrdom, as for example the execution of Christians under certain of the Roman emperors because they refused to renounce their faith. By accepting pagan religion they would have lived, by refusing it they died. Therefore the choice of life or death was in their hands. But because the choice lay in their spiritual convictions and they chose to die rather than desert truth as they knew it, neither nature nor man has branded them suicides. The reasons are among those philosophical exceptions described by Olympiodorus, and the karmic results are modified by motive, which is the most powerful karmic force in the world. Accidental death creates no change in the personality laws. It is regarded the same as a natural death, with the possible exception that the mental nature maintains a certain unwillingness to die because of numerous and intense physical attachments. The after-death condition of the person killed in middle life by accident or disease is entirely normal unless the emotions are inordinately intense. Under such conditions the personality may be temporarily earthbound. The fate of the physical body after death is of no great consequence. The personality, having entirely retired in from 12 to 72 hours depending upon the conditions causing death, is indifferent to the fate of its discarded body. Suicide 173. If, however, there is a tendency to be earthbound due to unusual conditions accompanying death, it is advisable to cremate the body to destroy any possible psychic ties between the personality and the physical world. Elaborate funerals confer no virtue, and, if anything, add to the discomfiture of the personality if it is earthbound. If the entire theory of funerals could be disposed of, and the relatives and friends of the deceased would follow the Oriental custom of performing some civic act in memory of the dead, the living would be far more benefited. The inclination to suicide is frequently the result of poor health. Energy depletion from overwork, worries over money or domestic affairs, and forebodings concerning the future, are common causes of suicide. Very often a few days' rest or a little constructive planning, or consultation with a qualified physician, will completely terminate the desire for self-destruction. The impulse is stronger during climacteric periodes, that is, the years of a person's life which are divisible by 7 without a remainder. Of 11 suicides noted in a daily paper, all the persons were in climacteric years. Nearly every normal person, at least once during his lifetime, feels an inclination to commit suicide. The notion quickly passes, being repulsive to the mind and contrary to the fundamental tendencies of the individual. If the condition persists, proper methods should be used to increase interest in life and environment. A good hobby frequently cures suicidal tendencies in persons of advancing years, and a good job has a similar effect upon the young. Life should be viewed as a rich opportunity for experience. A certain amount of adversity should be accepted as inevitable, and is no justifiable cause for protracted morbidity. 174 Reincarnation, the cycle of necessity. Suicide thwarts the plan of the entity which sends out the personality. Therefore, religiously, it was regarded as a sin against the Father, that is, against the cause of self. Fortunately, the entity is far beyond the reach of man's destructive tendencies, and suicide is merely incidental to its evolution. It is, however, definitely detrimental to the consciousness of the personality, bringing much grief that could be avoided. Life is not to be evaded, but to be lived. Fate versus free will. There is a popular belief that the doctrine of reincarnation and karma is fatalistic, destroying the right of the individual to live his own life, and overshadowing his daily purposes with a structure of inevitable circumstances. The first consideration therefore must be, is there such a thing as free will? This philosophy denies, bestowing upon man only the power of choice. Free will would imply that an individual could be anything that he wanted to be. This obviously is impossible. He possesses only the right of choice between things which he is capable of doing. As all men have a different degree of capacity, so the power of choice differs with each individual. The power of choice is a privilege of selecting that which appears to be the best from among certain possibilities. This power of selective action is in a sense, dharma, or the right to interpret and select certain elements from the karma that is at hand. For example, it is karma that an individual is to make a trip, but it is dharma that he may choose the means of transportation and to a certain degree the places where he will go. Having gained certain knowledge from this trip, it is his dharma to be able to use this knowledge to advance his own ends. But it is his inevitable karma to suffer, if in the advancement of his own purposes he commits any fault against natural law. Dharma is action. 175-176 Reincarnation, the cycle or necessary. Karma is reaction. Action once performed, the reaction is inevitable. Each individual has certain control over action. Therefore, philosophy is not fatalistic concerning the performance of action, but it is fatalistic in its prediction of the inevitable consequences that will follow action. Each man is free to do certain things, but having done them he must abide by their consequences. There can be no exception to this rule or the whole reasonable universe collapses. It is karma that brings us into life according to the ripe destiny of the entity. Having come into this world, we are capable of performing certain actions. We can study hard or we can be lazy, we can be efficient or inefficient, happy or sad, honest or dishonest. Therein lies our free will. All through life karma is confronting us with unfinished busyness, but we have the right to react to these karmic conditions according to our own understanding. Having started a course of procedure, karma sets in again, and each action starts a new chain of consequences. For this reason, Buddhism teaches that there can be no end to reincarnation and karma until the causes of action die out in the individual. As long as the desire to be, to do, or to possess remains, we are subject to karma. It is fate that we meet certain obstacles. But it is integrity that we face them well and use them as stepping stones to greater achievement. No person who is ignorant can be free. Freedom belongs entirely to those who have emancipated themselves from bondage to retributive karma. To end karma, we must work out the old and cease to create new. When this end has been accomplished, the entity itself becomes identified with fair versus free-willed v7, the personality which has accomplished this relative perfection. The result is the initiate who thinks no longer merely with the mind, but rather bears witness to the Father, the collective entity. Reincarnation is not fatalistic any more than man-made law is fatalistic. The criminal who is caught does not necessarily associate the punishment for his crime with any system of fatalism, he inwardly resigns himself to cause and effect. In the same way the indiscreet eater does not consider his dyspepsia as fatalism, he merely recognizes his indiscretion and bewails the fact that his constitution will not support his appetite. Is it, then, fatalism to believe that an action performed demands a certain compensation? If the action is good, the compensation is good; if the action is wrong, the compensation is discomfiting. It is not necessary that any individual should commit all of the mistakes which usually afflict life. But having committed them, he has no right under any just philosophy to feel that he is immune from consequences. The same is true of the birth of the personality. The individual is born where he is and what he is because of the cumulative growth of his spiritual entity. Conceivably, the entity will produce nobler and more adequate personalities as rapidly as the existing personality improves and justifies it. According to Buddha, the present state of the individual is due to the previous conditions set up in past ages by long-forgotten personalities. He did not regard this as fatalistic, however, but merely as honest. Certainly there is no reason why life should be left to chance, and there is no evidence that man without superior help can carve an adequate destiny for himself. It is obvious to the thinker that only someone 178 reincarnation, the Psyche or NECS infinitely old and infinitely wise, can plan the life of modern man if that life is to pay any dividends in usefulness and integrity. That mysterious something which is infinitely old and infinitely wise is the permanent entity that alone is capable of judging the proper direction of the impermanent action which we call life. Without the permanent entity to direct, without universal law to circumscribe and assist, and without a universal wisdom to direct it, this would be a sorry world for a poor, mortal man who tries to maintain his free will in the midst of a universe about which he knows so little. The secret of genius: man may achieve distinction in one of two ways. The first is called precocity, and the second experience. Any person who achieves fame or outstanding success prior to his 25th year is properly described as precocious. The normal expectancy which is violated by precocity dictates that position or distinction should arrive between the 40th and 50th year as the result of the normal unfoldment of aptitudes. The boy violinist, Yehudi Menuhin, is a clear example of a prodigy, while the unfolding abilities of Thomas Edison are an example of outstanding yet normal development. The effort to associate genius with heredity has been conspicuously unsuccessful. The prodigy is usually separate and apart from the rest of his family. Nor is the offspring of genius endowed with the parental ability. Greatness does not appear to be communicable. It may often develop as the result of a conflict between inner ability and environmental circumstances. To the materialist, genius is an anomaly, a mystery for which there can be no reasonable explanation. It is only classical philosophy which can advance an acceptable solution. Genius lies fundamentally in the entity, not in the personality. Genius therefore is a physical manifestation of some part of the spiritual nature of the permanent entity. 179-180 Reincarnation, the Psyche or necessity. Precocity is a matter of psychical chemistry. Normal attainment in later years is the result of the gradual development of abilities or the sensitizing of the personality, as in the case of the artist and musician. The exceptional person is usually unable to explain the reason for his own precocity. Newton's theory of gravitation was not the result of observing a falling apple, but rather of a dream, the vividness of which impelled him to action. Beethoven and Schubert have specifically stated that they heard certain of their musical compositions as though played in the air before they committed them to paper. Other outstanding achievements have been attributed to fate or accidents. Wherever there is exceptional ability, there is some mysterious factor involved. If the incarnating personality is not the direct result of heredity but is merely attracted to an appropriate environment, then the personality is not dependent upon heredity for its precocity. Genius is an individual matter and is not explainable simply on the basis of inherited traits. The entity sends out personalities for one special reason, to release its own potentialities and objectify them through personalization. The entity, participating in the divine nature of the world, is rich in unmanifested abilities. Evolution through rebirth is the eternal process of manifesting capacity through a sequence of personalities. The genius is a richly endowed personality. Precocity puts definite strain upon evolving organisms. Man, intended to mature slowly, is likely to upset body chemistry if the mental development is out of tune or adjustment with the physical progress. The first 21 years of life are years of bodybuilding, and if these biochemic the secret of genius 181 processes are interfered with by the prodigious development of some specialized talent, frequently there is trouble in later life. A great number of youthful prodigies either die in their early 30s or lose their outstanding abilities. There are exceptions, of course, but early genius beyond a reasonable degree is hazardous, thus indicating that nature prefers a slow and normal method of growth. Physically, genius may be a matter of glands. The glandular system is especially sensitive to the impulses of the permanent entity, and glandular derangement results in a wide variety of mental and physical abnormalcies and subnormalcies. Where precocity is a result of glandular unbalance, permitting an uncontrolled flow of energy from the entity, it is far better for the glandular system to be normalized, thus permitting balanced development. There is a fine line of demarcation between genius and insanity. When so-called genius is not the result of obvious causes, or its impulses are carried too far, the result is mental breakdown. It is far better to be lacking in exceptional ability than it is to have one extraordinary capacity and the rest of the temperament undeveloped. This is an era of specialization. The versatile individual seldom achieves greatness. It is safer, however, to be versatile than it is to have one intensive ability. This one ability can destroy the entire value sense, resulting in a useless rather than a useful life. Precocity cannot be prevented from AP pairing, but its presence demands greater watchfulness on the part of the parents, who must incline the exceptional qualities in ways of normal expression. If you are threatened with exceptional precocity, or there are such persons in your immediate environment, you should 18. Reincarnation, the cycle of necessity, do everything possible to fill out, balance, and normalize the so-called genius factor, otherwise there will be ultimate fanaticism and a general failure as the byproduct of some one dominant ability. The true purpose of growth is accomplished by maintaining harmony among the abilities and capacities. The loss of this harmony results in mental disease. Forgiveness of sin versus karma. The belief in the doctrine of the forgiveness of sin one's entirely inconsistent with the recognition of the immutability of universal law. Either life is a series of fortuitous circumstances dominated by the principle of chance, or the law of consequence bestows upon each that which is merited by previous action. There can be no compromise. The human mind must accept law or chaos, pattern or confusion, as the rule of action. Frequent efforts have been made to blend the doctrine of vicarious atonement with the laws of rebirth and karma. Ingenious explanations have been offered to prove that under certain conditions and for certain people law is tempered by grace. This is only wishful thinking, man's old theological upbringing overshadowing his philosophical attainments. It is well within the memory of modern students that various fabricators promised to make man mightier than the law. It has been erroneously taught that karma might be overcome by breathing through the right nostril, meditating on the kundalini, or supplicating an adept. Various schools of metaphysical philosophy have built up huge followings by assuring human beings without the courage of their convictions that karma can be dissipated with a mantra, and that 184 reincarnation, the psyche of Necessary, the whole character and temperament can be reformed by an affirmation. In most cases only the more gullible have been caught in the nets of deliberate falsehood. Occasionally, however, an explanation has been advanced so temptingly devised that even the better type of mind has been influenced to disregard the law and to hold the hope that some angelic hierarchy could wash away the sins and errors of several hundred lives. When the Oriental doctrine of reincarnation and karma was brought to the West, it interested only the most honest and courageous freethinkers. For the majority it was a heretical and insidious doctrine calculated to turn men from the noble truths of Christian orthodoxy. In order to overcome the instinctual prejudices of the nominally Christian laity, an effort was made to effect a compromise. The enthusiastic Orientalist pointed out that Christ and Buddha taught approximately the same doctrines. This viewpoint appeased many, but even these insisted that some pattern be devised by which it could be demonstrated that Christ greatly excelled Buddha. Therefore a world plan was worked out wherein Buddha should be considered as the great teacher of a previous cycle, while Christ was elevated as the master of the present world order. Christians nodded smugly and agreed that this brand of Orientalism was definitely intriguing. At last the controversy was reduced to the problem of forgiveness versus law. This was the most difficult decision. It was decided that reincarnation and karma were laws governing the fate of ordinary mortals, but that Christ, by virtue of his identity with the Father, could at discretion nullify or change universal law. Karma worked for the forgiveness of sin versus karma 185 Monherd, but for the elect there was a dispensation of forgiveness. The result was hopeless confusion and contradiction. Laws were not laws. There were unexplainable exceptions which plagued the mind as irregular verbs plague the schoolboy. Everything became an exception to everything else. Orientalism disappeared. The old teachings of Pythagoras and Buddha were misinterpreted out of existence. The consequence was a distorted Christian theology ornamented with Eastern terms and some comparatively inconsequential Eastern dogma. Exceptions destroyed the rule. It is only fair to say that the average enthusiastic believer sensed no contradiction between vicarious atonement and reincarnation and karma. Understanding neither doctrine, he could accept both. The result has been a great number of compromise cults which teach a little of everything and not much of anything. The first rule that the Oriental disciple learns is that the law has no exceptions, that neither God nor man can deflect its course in any way. The law preceded the gods, it will remain after all living things have vanished. The law abides in space, it governs the motion of space, it forms, maintains, and dissolves the world. The law is not regarded as something to be feared or escaped, but rather the true hope and security of the wise. As surely as the law punishes inadequacy, so surely it rewards adequacy. The man who lives by the law need fear no other man nor his own ultimate fate. The law both punishes and protects. It is the ever-present cause of progress. The saints, sages, and world teachers are not exceptions to the law with power to change or modify its course. They 186 reincarnation, the cycle of necessity are the product of such laws as evolution, reincarnation, and karma. The integrity of his thought and action elevates the world teacher to the chief place among men, and establishes him as an instructor of the rest. He is firmly supported by universal law, and manifests it in every thought, word, and action. The laws of nature are scarcely the subject upon which elaborate theologies can be built. The doctrine of individual integrity is fatal to organized systems of religion. Therefore, early in the history of faiths, the priestcrafts began the process of making their followers theology conscious. Right and wrong were no longer right and wrong. Prayers and offerings, especially offerings, became the requisites of salvation. The result of such notions was ecclesiasticism. The priest or the preacher became the intermediary capable of bestowing divine blessing or forgiving human sin. The law vanished and the despotism of dogma took its place. The student of reincarnation and karma must realize once and for all there can be no exceptions of any kind, or for any reason, to the laws of evolution, reincarnation, and karma. Anyone who teaches an exception teaches a false doctrine. As the Buddhist monk says, there is no refuge but the law. Reincarnation and karma are the religious teachings of the New Age. They are individual in their application, but utterly universal in their scope. There is no need of a priestcraft with its concept of special privilege. Reincarnation and karma are merely mental and spiritual honesty applied to the process of living. It is regrettable to find that a number of sincere Orientalists have been deceived by the curious mixture of Eastern and Western teachings known as popular Orientalism. Fork 4 ENESS of Sin versus Karma 187. Very few legitimate teachers of Eastern mysticism have ever come to the West. We have comparatively little knowledge of real Oriental doctrines, and never has it proved more true that a little knowledge is a dangerous thing. The intelligent Oriental is shocked, horrified, and amused by the misinterpretation of his beliefs which flourish in our Western world. To him it is incredible that any people should be gullible enough to accept as bona fide such obviously ridiculous teachings. The Asiatic is trained from childhood to believe in law. His earliest actions are a conscious dedication to the universal pattern of law and truth. Those who accept reincarnation and karma as rules by which to live should accept them utterly and without compromise. They should live in the law, recognizing the exactitude of the law as the one sure and inevitable fact which man is capable of knowing. In a universe of unknown mysteries, reincarnation and karma stand out as knowable and usable. The honest man approaches these laws with complete acceptance. He desires no escape from the consequences of his own actions. He expects no liberation apart from self-perfection. He may even acknowledge that he does not know what perfection is, but realizes that the law will ultimately bring to him the knowledge of all that is knowable, the highest achievement of which man is capable. It is proper and right that those who believe in reincarnation and karma should make it the absolute rule of personal conduct. They should perform only such actions as they are willing to accept as consequence. They should evade no consequences which they realize are the results of 188 reincarnation, the cycle or necessity personal karma. Nothing else is necessary. We require no heaven or hell, no gods or demons. Life is the living out of cause and effect, each cause producing an effect commensurate with itself, each effect in turn setting new causes in motion. When the theory of evolution is added to this picture, we can recognize eternal growth toward reality. Every experience becomes a part of knowledge. We can live impersonally, comforted by the truth of eternal progress. Reincarnation and karma, if compromised in any way by the belief in mitigating circumstances, or interfered with in any way by the whims or pleasure of the gods, would immediately cease to be laws. Disciplines of liberation. The doctrines of reincarnation and karma as taught in Buddhist countries are the basis of a complete system of impersonal salvation. The acceptance of these two laws carries certain moral responsibilities. What you believe, you must do. A philosophy of life is something to be lived, to be applied to all problems of living, and to inspire the character and moderate the extremes of temperament. The Eastern mind is devoted to its religious philosophies to the same degree that the Western mind is devoted to the concept of wealth. The Oriental desires to become, even as the Occidental desire to possess. Reincarnation as a belief extends the horizon of existence to include numerous embodiments under a wide diversity of circumstances. The psychology of reincarnation is very different from the one-life belief that dominates the West. In one life so little can actually be accomplished, so large a part of hopes and ideals can never be realized. The Western thinker is limited to the narrow space of 60 years and 10. In this hopelessly inadequate time he must live, move, and have his being. In this cramped interval he must prepare for an eternal hereafter. It is no wonder, then, that material theories, the products of scientific skepticism, are accepted as a welcome escape from the hopelessness of prevailing religious beliefs. 189-190 Reincarnation. The cycle of necessity. Some skeptics criticize the Asiatic for his belief in many lives. They maintain that it results in indolence and indifference in matters of the present existence, that it is a philosophy of procrastination and evasion, a wishful thinking for better states to come. This is not a fair criticism because the believer in reincarnation insists that his future existences depend upon his present integrity. Therefore reincarnation is a stimulus to right action, but not necessarily a stimulus to acquisitiveness. It is inevitable that the belief in reincarnation and karma should result in the development of a method by which the workings of these laws should be expedited. In the East there are numerous philosophical orders which teach the individual how to gain the most in experience and knowledge from the doctrine of compensation and the plurality of lives. Where physical life is merely a passing incident in a larger pattern made up of numerous lives, the attitude toward living is different, less intense, less personal, less possessive, and more detached. There is also a higher idealism. Much more can be accomplished in several lives than in one. Therefore the goal of living is further removed from the present than in a philosophy which teaches a single existence. The reincarnationist does not believe in haste, stress, or strain. It is the quality of accomplishment and not the rapidity of it that concerns such a mind. Whereas the West is ever hurrying though it knows not where it goes, the East proceeds slowly, exploring every detail of life. It has time to linger on its way. Two Chinese scholars will sip their tea by the hour, indifferent to the haste about them. For these scholars there is time for gentle conversation, for the study of art, for the admiring of a fine painting, and for the indiscreet lines of liberation, 19 numerable small formalities of the Confucian code. In the same way the Buddhist abbot in his saffron-colored robe spends hours pruning his wisteria or throwing crumbs to the golden carp in the monastery pool. The temptation to achieve at the expense of other men is gone. The haste to use up what little of life remains has no place among those who understand the law. The yogi in meditation in his cave at the headwaters of the Jumna, or the Persian Sufi illuminating manuscripts by the light of a single oil lamp, fulfills the promise of his years, each in his own way enriched by the belief in a continuity of existences. Reincarnation is a belief that corrects not only the concept of incessant striving, but the illusional achievements toward which this striving is directed are shown in their true unreality. There is no desire to be great as men know greatness, no mad questing after power or position. Instead there is the remembrance of the Buddha's words, "Who lives a prince may come again in rags." Merit lies not in commanding and controlling other men, but in a kind and gentle victory over self. The uselessness of position and possessions which cannot survive the dissolution of the flesh inclines the mind to temperate courses in a world of excesses and extremes. The true understanding of karma solves, as we already have shown, the whole mystery of egotism. It is not the illusional self that goes on after the dissolution of the fleshly part, therefore the whims, desires, and appetites of the personality are of little consequence. They are not even important enough to be called good or evil. Conscious immortality is no desire of the Eastern mind. Therefore during life 192 reincarnation, the cycle of necessity, there is no resistance to those innumerable circumstances which normally would offend the ego. When the Westerner is reminded of his insignificance he is angry and resentful. But the Easterner, knowing truly how little he is not offended by criticism, but acknowledging all the faults of which he is suspected realizes that only lives, many lives, can correct them all. The fear of death is the great delusion of the Occident. As the time of physical dissolution approaches, both the living and the dying unite in common panic. Then comes the funeral, with weeping relatives sobbing over beloved remains, then empty years in which the memory of the one who has gone dominates all that concerns the daily existence of those who are left behind. This miserable picture is not possible when the doctrines of reincarnation and karma are actually believed. Death is not the end of anything except a personality that in a certain sense is never actually real, being merely a shadow cast in matter by an immortal being who lives all the lives of the personalities which it creates. The Eastern mystic views the Christian concept of immortality with the utmost dread. Nothing could be more horrible than going on forever, always remembering, always desiring, always repenting. Reincarnation and karma also clarify such matters as physical relationships, of father and son, of mother and daughter, of brother and sister, and of husband and wife. To the Buddhist, all associational relationships are temporary and illusional. There is no such thing as blood relationship, there are merely personalities living through the dream of relationship in order that certain experiences may be gained. The permanent entities above are complete in themselves. Discrepancies of Liberation 193. The personalities which they emanate merely appear to be related to each other. Relationship is but the privilege of association for the purpose of growth and the opportunity to learn new lessons and to approach a little nearer the mystery of understanding. In substance, then, the belief in rebirth and compensation changes the entire viewpoint, enriches it, normalizes it, frees it for action, and removes forever the theological bugaboo of perdition. The purpose of all evolution is to achieve liberation, that is, to produce a personality into which the entity flows so perfectly and completely that there ceases to be any interval between the two. To achieve this end requires the disciplining of the personality. This discipline is made possible only because previous lives have enriched the new personality with sufficient wisdom to desire this discipline. Until that time is reached, the personality is incapable of achieving liberation. Liberation as taught in the East must never be confused with the absolutism of modern metaphysics. True liberation is the withdrawal of the personality, the end of the illusion of I-ness, the consummation of hundreds of lives of gradual evolution toward reality. It is not the product of willpower, meditation, concentration, or any of these exercises which are advocated as substitutes for personal experience and action. Man cannot think himself, will himself, or hope himself into the state of true enlightenment. Liberation results from the elevation and refinement of personalities through thousands of years of rebirth, with the result that at last a personality is emanated which is capable of making the supreme adjustment in which it absolutely negates itself to the entity from which it emanates. 194 Reincarnation, the cycle of necessity. This negation is not a psychical thing, nor is it a Christian humility, nor again an inhibition as in the case of the evangelized personality who is constantly recounting his sins. Liberation is a perfect and complete adjustment in which all of the parts of the personality are in perfect rapport with the entity itself. The result is adeptship and liberation from the will of personality rebirth. The average student of philosophy is not going to accomplish liberation in the present life. There are more than 2 billion personalities on the earth today, and of those now living it is unlikely that more than 3 will accomplish liberation in their present incarnation. These 3 will have been faithful chelists of great masters for several lives. It should be remembered that it is not necessary to attain the ultimate illumination, such as that reached by Gautama Buddha, in order to live well and happily through the years of the present personality. Everyone could live better than he does. Each could make a definite step forward, bringing with it added security and happiness, if he would live according to the law. In the East, the acceptance of reincarnation and karma is the first conscious step on the long road that leads to reality. These laws are part of the esoteric teaching of every legitimate world religion, and the acceptance of them is essential to entry upon the path. After the student has committed himself to the doctrines of rebirth and karma, he must begin to live the gentle, impersonal life that must accompany this commitment. Now comes the greatest point of danger. Having discovered a part of truth, but still partaking of considerable ignorance, the mind has a tendency to go off on tangents and to concoct innumerable erroneous beliefs relating to the subject. This has been the common calamity in the West. A phase disciplines of liberation. 195 of this mistake is indifference to the misfortunes of others. The attitude becomes one of they have earned it, so let them suffer it. This is not healthy. No matter how wise we may become, or how stupid others may appear to be, it is the duty of the disciple to assist the uninformed in any way possible. Another phase is an intolerance toward people of other beliefs and a sense of personal superiority. Such attitudes destroy the improvement that has been gained, and the next personality sent out by the entity will probably be deprived of the knowledge of rebirth. For the student just coming into the belief in rebirth and karma, or slightly advanced in the doctrine, certain suggestions may be in order. In the first place, live normally and happily. Prove that knowledge has increased tolerance and understanding, and not limited them. Balance the temperament, advancing simultaneously along several lines of accomplishment if possible. Do not become improvident, but realize that when the time comes for you to be free from physical responsibilities, the entity will free you. Do not attempt virtues beyond your understanding simply because others tell about them. Do not aim at immediate emancipation or you will be sorely disappointed. Apply your beliefs to the circumstances affecting your life, and make sure that they work when they differ from your personal preferences. Teach them to others, but never force them upon a person who does not desire the knowledge of these laws. Do not permit impersonality to chill or harden your life, or permit yourself to become indifferent to social or environmental problems. Live what you believe, but make sure that you actually believe what you live. If you do, there will be no conflict, and in a few hundred more lives you will achieve liberation, normally and beautifully. 196 Reincarnation, the psyche of an accessory. The books say well, my brothers. Each man's life the outcome of his former living is, the bygone wrongs bring forth sorrows and woes, the bygone right breeds bliss. That which ye sow ye reap. See yonder fields. The sesamum was sesamum, the corn was corn. The silence and the darkness knew. So is a man's fate born. He cometh, reaper of the things he sowed, sesamum, corn, so much cast in past birth, and so much weed and poison stuff, which mar him and the aching earth. If he shall labor rightly, rooting these, and planting wholesome seedlings where they grew, fruitful and fair and clean the ground shall be, and rich the harvest due. The light of Asta Nirvana. The laws of rebirth and karma are not ends in themselves, but means toward the accomplishment of the supreme end, nirvana. All lives lead toward the summit of life, the entity itself. When the cycle of bodies has been completed, and the personalities have fulfilled their various destinies, the cycle of life ends. Nirvana is defined by Professor Rhys Davids as the dying out of the three fires of the personality. The smoldering desires, ambitions, and attachments ultimately die out. The Northern Buddhist waits patiently for liberation from the involvements of material existence. He seeks to untangle the snarled threads of life, he seeks selflessness within himself, he aspires to the all by becoming nothing. It is difficult for the Westerner, with his concept of the superpersonality and a fond belief in the eternity of personal consciousness, to find comfort and peace along the ways of Eastern thought. To the Occidental there is something negative in the passive strength of Buddhist teachings. But the East is old in conquest, pillage, and power. It has perceived inwardly the uselessness and impermanence of temporal superiority. The Eastern monk turns from the illusion of the world to the reality of the law, and finds in the law the perfect code of life. 197–198 Reincarnation, the cycle of necessity for the average man and woman. Nirvana is not an imminent concern. It is a product of a development far beyond that possible for the average person. The arhats meditate upon the nirvana. But for the householder the problem is to live well now and not incline the mind to useless speculation about unattained ultimates. The only reason that it is necessary to discuss nirvana in a book dealing with reincarnation and karma is because an intelligent life must be based upon a rational concept of the true meaning of life. While we believe in heaven and hell, we can never live the law. As long as the after-death state is associated with a golden city with jeweled gates, it is impossible to think life through or to build toward personal integrity. There must be a decision within the individual to determine whether there is sufficient wisdom to renounce the concept of heaven and to cling to the concept of nirvana. Nirvana is the suspension of all action, the inevitable result of advanced philosophical knowledge. It is truly the state of the entity undefiled and uncomplicated. It is pure nature, the suspension of activity as the result of a full knowledge of the purpose and the plan of mortal existence. The belief in reincarnation and karma is useless unless coupled with a reasonable doctrine concerning the ultimate state of man. After physical death the personality, according to the Tibetan notion, enters the Western paradise, the glorious dwelling place of the Dhyani Buddha Amitabha. Here the decarnate entity, as one of the blessed dead, wanders through the gardens of Sukhavati. There is little difference between this concept and that of the paradisiacal sphere of the early Christian Church. Theologians would have us believe that virtuous souls dwell to nirvana 199 gather in a mystical land of beauty and contentment. These also are Egypt's Era gardens, and the pleasant lands of the later Greeks. This likewise is Valhalla where the Nordic heroes feast together, the red man's happy hunting grounds, where the Indian braves build their teepees in the sky and snare phantoms with their nets. This intermediate condition is merely the sleeping or death side of life and should never be regarded as an ultimate condition. It is but the sphere of good karma. Righteous action results in a tranquil place of happiness, the Isles of the Blessed. Nirvana finds no accurate description in any of the religious systems of the world. It is a return to the All-Father, something beyond the Shadowland, the place where the great sachems go, the place of no return. Nirvana is far from the star-spangled plains of space in the midst of which rises Indra's palace with its golden dome. In Egypt the god of the Addadom stood with one finger pressed to his lips, the proper symbol of silence concerning the greater mysteries. From paradise men may return again to earth, but from the nirvana none returns. It should not be supposed that the entity enters nirvana. The attainment of nirvana is an experience of the final personality returning to the unconditioned consciousness of the entity itself. Nor is nirvana the end of evolution, it is merely the end of evolution as we know it, but not the end of growth. The entity will send forth no more personalities, but in the next great cycle of life the entity will create another type of extension and achieve growth by other means. Nirvana, then, is the end of the personality forming attribute of the entity. 200 Reincarnation, the cycle or necessity in the Tibetan cosmogony. The world, the forms of personality, is slowly dissolved at the end of a cycle of manifestation. This is a symbolic description of nirvana when all that remains of the world is the bridge of the siddhas. The siddhis of the saints are the supersubstantial virtues which have been transferred to the entity by the process of rebirth, and therefore do not perish. At last, however, even the siddhas go to sleep, floating in their mysterious ship over the great deep, the vacant sphere of personality. It is said that only Adi Buddha remains, the permanent entity sits in profound contemplation above the deep. There are no bodies, only silence and the self. It is then written that Adi Buddha itself, the supreme lord of its bodies, rests in introspection, its forces and potentials are subjectified, it meditates inwardly upon its own heart. By this meditation disassociation is achieved. The self becomes selfless, and waits. At the dawn of the next cycle of evolution the eye of the self is opened, nirvana is over. With the previous nirvana time became eternity, with the reawakening, eternity becomes time. The Lord of the experiences Adi Buddha spins the new wheel and sends forth the next cycle of life. The old world is gone, the old personalities are gone, the old joys and the old sorrows are gone. New rules and new laws govern the new manifestation. In the new Manvantara, world cycle, a new part of Adi Buddha achieves evolution in a new part of space. Humanity is gone, it remains only as a memory in the eternal mind. The new creation we may not name, but like man it has its beginning and its end, and only the ageless entity survives all the changes. Therefore the Hindus call this entity the golden thread upon which are strung together like beads, planets and souls, worlds and beings. Nirvana 201. Most Orientalists have not sensed the true picture of the nirvana. They think it is an evasion, a running away from existence, an escape into nothingness. Only those greatly enlightened, like the Buddha himself, realize that it is only the end of an order. The known must pass away that the unknown may be revealed. There is no immortality for man, no continuity of personalities. There is one entity emanating new personalities from the substance of accumulated experience. Only the entity by its true nature is immortal, only the entity endures all the changes that happen in the infinite duration of space and time. The personalities as drops of experience endure with the entity as part of the entity, but not as personalities or individualities. Personalities are merely units of experience which enrich the entity as it meditates away the ages. Reincarnation and karma are the great laws, the diamond truths. Through the understanding of these laws the personality overcomes its innate egotism, and lives for the sake of the entity and not for its own sake. Hundreds of personalities bestow their part and bring their offerings of accomplishment. Thus enriched, the entity finally emits one personality in which all of the virtues of past lives are embodied. This is the supreme incarnation, this is the world teacher. Having manifested this final sublime embodiment, the entity returns this personality to itself and human evolution is finished. We are each part of this plan. Each personality that populates this earth is the visible symbol of an evolving entity that remains above, building and waiting. Each of us as personalities is fulfilling the expectancy of the previous personalities of whose very natures we are composed. We in turn are building our life and our experience into body 202 reincarnation, the cycle of necessity patterns that are to follow. This is the philosophy of reincarnation and karma, the will of birth and death which ceases to turn only when the last enlightened personality of our body chain achieves the illumination. Bibliography Book Seatural Hentage of Inta Sri Ramankrishna Centenary Memorial. Calcutta, 1939. Extracts from the Vahan edited by Sarah Corbett London and Benares, 1904 5 years of Theosophy selected articles from the Theosophist London, 1885, Zoroastrianism in the Light of Taco Sophie compiled by P. M. Gadi Ali, 1896 Anonymous Synopsis of the Jodo Shinshu Creed Kyoto, 1922 Alger, Reverend William A Critical History of the Doctrine of a Future Life. Philadelphia, 1860, Rights Against Rebirth, Philadelphia, 1878, Converted to Rebirth, Anderson, Jerome A Reincarnation, A Study of the Human Soul San Francisco, 1894. Second edition Arundale, Francesca The Idea of Rebirth including a translation of an essay on reincarnation by Carl Heckel. With a preface by A. P. Sinnott. London, 1890-03 Avalon, Arthur the Serpent Power Madras, 1924 Barker, Edward the Mendel, A Mode of Oriental Divination London 1874 Beck, L. Adams, E. Barrington, The Story of Oriental Philosophy New York, 1928 B. Gay, Attilio, Sant Favero, Alessandro Monsignor Arcivescovo L. Pucher Passavali Milano, 1911 Besant, Annie C. Works of Blake, William A. Letter to John Flaxman Blavatsky, HPC Works of Bonnet, James Egyptian Belai. And Modern Thought London, 1878 Bowen, Professor Francis Reincarnation, A Study of Forget 10 Truths Brown, Jolin P. The Dervishes Philadelphia, 1868 Kate Ness, Countess of Old Truths in a New Light London, 1876 204 Reincarnation, The Cycle or Neecsi Ty Carpenter, Edward Towards Democracy New York and London, 1922 Carter, Thomas Francis The Invention of Printing in China New York, 1931 Cornelia, Pierre La Servetwance de l'Ame Paris, 1924 Dassa, Phil Angie Swedenborg The Buddhist Los Angeles, 1887 Delaunay, Gabriel Documents pour servir à l'étude des la Reincarnation Paris, 1924 Duprel, Baron Karl. Philosophy of Mysticism, translated from the German by C. C. Maschy, London, 1889 Evans Wentz, W. Y. Tibetan Yoga and Secret Doctrines London, 1925 Evans Wentz, W. Y. Trebaton Book of the Dead London, 1936 Favero, Alessandro C. B. Gay Ficht, J. G. Destiny of Man pages 58-59 Gelli, Gustave From the Unconscious to the Conscious translated from the French by S. de Brath. New York, 1920 Gaudet, R.F., Reincarnation, A Universal Truth Los Angeles, 1928. Contains an inclusive bibliography Haggard, Sir H. Ryder The Days of My Life, Chapter on Religion. London, 1926 Halt. Fielding the Soul of a People London, 1909 Heckel. Carl C. Arundale Hedge, Professor Frederick Henry The Ways of the Spirit Boston, 1877 Handel. Max C. Works of Henderson, Reverend A. The Will of Life Norwich, 1931 Herder. Johann Gottfried von Dialogue on Transmigration, translated by F. H. Hedge in his Prose Writers of Germany, Philadelphia, 1848. Higgins, Godfrey The Celtic Druids London, 1827 Holwell, J.Z. A Review of the Original Principles of the Ancient Brahmins London, 1779 Hume. David Essays, Moral, Political, and Literary, Essay on Immortality. London, 1875 Hurley, Th. Evolution and Ethics New York, 1894 Iamblish's Life of Pythagoras translated copyright Thomas Taylor London, 1926 Lamblishes on the Mysteries translated by Thomas Taylor Chiswick, 1821 Inga, Dean The Philosophy of Plot Rouse Volume TL, p. 30 London, 1918 Bibliography 205 Johnston, Charles The Memory of Past Births New York, 1900. 4th ed. King, C.W. The Gnostics and Their Remains London, 1887 Laertius. Diogenes Life of Pythagoras Leibniz, G.W. Monadology translated by F. W. Hedge in the Journal of Speculative Philosophy Volume I, New York, 1867 Lutoslawski, Professor Vincenti Pre-Existence and Reincarnation London, 1928 Lutostowski, Professor Vincenti World of Suez London, 1924 Martin, Eva The Ring of Return London, 1927 McMahon, A.R., The Karens of the Golden Chersones London, 1876 Mead, G.R.S. The Thrice Great Hermes London, 1906 Mead, G.R.S. Orpheus London, 1896 Moore, George Footmatem Psychosis. The Ingersoll LEC Tour, 1914, Harvard University Cambridge, 1914 McTaggart, John M.C. Some Dogmas of Religion London, 1930 McTaggart, John M.C. Human Immortality and Pre-Existence New York, 1915 Muller, Max The STX Systems of Indian Philosophy London, 1903 Muller, Max 3 Lectures on the Vedanta Philosophy London, 1894 Myers, Isaac Obala Philadelphia, 1888 Nivedita, Sister, Margaret E. Noble, Myths and Legends Hindus and Buddhists London, N.D. Alcott, Henry Steele Old Diary Leaves, Volume I New York and London, 1895 Alcott, Henry Steele Zoroastrianism in the Light of Theosophy 1896 Papoose, Dr. G. and Cause, Reincarnation translated by Marguerite Valois from the French London, N.A.D., Pascal, Dr. Théophile La Reincarnation Paris, 1908 Pesani, André La Pluralité d'Existences de l'âme Paris, 1865 Plot News on the Descent of the Sword translation of Thomas Taylor Price, James M. Reincarnation in the New Testament New York, 1900 Celis Exposition of Chaldee Dogmas Puriker, G. to the Esoteric Tradition Point Loma, California, 1935 Renouvier, Charles La Nouvelle Monadologie Paris, 1899 Renovire, Charles Les Dilmatums de la Métaphysique Pure Paris, 1901 206 Reincarnation, the Cicere or Nécessaire Renouvique, Charles Histoire et Solution de Problems Métaphysiques Paris, 1901 Renouvier, Charles Le Personnalisme Paris, 1903 Roches, Col. de Lévis. Successives Paris, 191 Schlegentweit, Emile Buddhism Intrabit Leipzig and London, 1863 Shuraif, Jafurk Danuni Islam, or the Customs of the Musulmans of India Madras, 1863 Synod, APSCE Writings of Smedley, Reverend Edward, and others The Occult Essences London, 1855 Spinoza Ethics, Book v. Stanley, Thomas History of Philosophy London, 1687 Steiner, Rudolph C. Works of Taylor, Thomas Miscellanies London, 1805 Taylor, Thomas Collectiana Onden, 1806 Thoreau, Henry David The Transmigration of the Seven Brahmans. A translation from the Hayavansa of Langlois New York, 1932 Voltaire Philosophical Dictionary Waddell, L. Austin Buddhism of Tibet or Lamaism London, 1895 Waite, Arthur Edward Azoth, or The Star in the East London, 1893 Walker, ed. Reincarnation, A Study of Forgotten Truth Houston and New York, 1888. Contains an excellent bibliography. Ward, Professor James The Realm of Ends, or Pluralism and the Ism Cambridge, 1920. 3RD edition. Willoughby Mead, Gerald Chinese Ghouls and Goblins London, 1926 magazine articles Bookman Shakespeare, Hall Caine, and Reincarnation. Maxwell June, 1932, p. 274 Contemporary Review Dian and Metempsychosis Francis Peake July, 1878, p. 694 Bibliography 207 International Journal of Ethics Doctrine of Reincarnation Ethically Considered __________________________________________________________________________________________________________ .grs Mead January, 1912, p. 159 Living Age World of Kirpal Singh ___________________________________ Anita Kashyap February, p. 520 The Fortnightly Review Life After Death, Chapter on Reincarnation, M. Materlink October, 1913, p. 604 Lucifer Emerson and Occultism. Genius Charles Johnston H. P. Blavatsky Volume I, p. 252 Volume V, p. 227 Commentary by City of Shiraz A Buddhist Catechism compiled AJC from the Sacred Writings of the Volume IL, p. 391 Southern Buddhists for the Use of Giordano Bruno. A Martyr Theosophist Charles Johnston Volume 3, p. 110 A Buddhist Prince's View of the Universe and the Nature of Man H.R.H. Chandarat Chudathar, Prince of Siam Volume IL, p. 205 Thoughts on Karma and Retnirnishan. H. P. Blavatsky. Vol. 4, p. 89 Metempsychosis H. P. Blavatsky Volume 4, p. 75, reprinted from the Allahabad Pioneer. Some Thoughts on Reincarnation Volume 4, p. 89 The Case for Metempsychosis E. Douglas Fawcett Volume V, p. 107, 199 Incarnation of the Devachanic Entity and Decay Volume V, p. 167 Europeans. Subhadra Bhikshu. London, 1890. A Review. Volume 6 p. 83 Reincarnation A Scientific Necessity Dawes, Williams Volume 13, p. 39 Lessing and Reincarnation Volume 12, p. 267 Schopenhauer on Reincarnation and Comparative Religion Volume 13, p. 269 Practical Proof of Re-Embodiment John M. Price Volume 13, p. 417 Goethe on Reincarnation Notes and Queries, A6 Volume 13, p. 427 Reincarnation T and Tibetan Buddhism GRS Mead Volume 2, p. 491 Quotations of Origen on Transmigration and Metempsychosis, Meaning Questioned, Volume 13, p. 516. 208 Reincarnation, The Psyche of Necessity New Faxabombs The Arunta ACHL November 14, 1907, p. 44. Important article on Central Australian belief that each man is a reincarnation of a totemic ancestor. Refers to an article by Nature M. Freehair in Globus, BD Sci, number 18, p. 285. New Church Review, Swedenborgian, Reincarnation Ray. Jar. I'm Janisek July, 1927, p. 278 Book Review, New Light Upon the Problem of Reincarnation D. G. Chetty October, 1934, p. 255 19th Century Reincarnation March, 1903, p. 446 C. Narayan Harishchandra Semi-Serious Speculations on Shoemakers, Socialism, and Reincarnation Walburga December, 1906, p. 928 Arvists to this world ____________________________________________________________________________________________________________________ AP Synod August, 1919, p. 297 The Path Theories About Reincarnation and Spirits H. P. Blavatsky November, 1886, p. 232 clarifies the statements made in Isis Unveiled, Volume I, 351-2. Reincarnation E. D. Walker May, 1887, p. 33 Respecting Reincarnation Anonymous August, 1888, p. 163 Reincarnation and Memory Haraj September, 1889 through February, 1890 The Reincarnating Part of Us Alexander Fullerton November, 1890, p. 252 Transmigration of Souls Haji March, 1891, p. 383 Reincarnation in Judaism and the Bible. WMQ Judge February, 1894, p. 357 Reincarnation of Animals William Brehan April, 1894, p. 3 Christian Fathers on Reincarnation William Q. Judge May, 1894, p. 40 Proofs of Reincarnation Jerome A. Anderson, M.D. June and July, 1895, p. 84, 116 The Doctrine of Rebirth Band USIA Wakefield December, 1895, p. 270 A Reincarnation ETH December, 1895, p. 281 Bibliography 209 Spectator Have I been on earth before? Shall I favor again? St. L. Strachey September 17, 1927, p. 411 On the Idea of Reincarnation Lady Pamela Gray September 24, 1927, p. 455 The Idea of Reincarnation Course, October 8, 1927, p. 544 The Idea of Reincarnation The Anagarika Dharmapala October 15, 1927, p. 598 The Idea of Reincarnation W. Y. Evans Wentz October 22, 1927, p. 648 The Hindu Idea of Reincarnation H. S. D. Chaturvedi October 22, 1927 The Idea of Reincarnation A. Besant October 29, 1927, p. 704 The Idea of Reincarnation Ghulam Farid Malik November 5, 1927, p. 766 The Idea of Reincarnation C. J. Reynolds November 12, 1927, p. 807 Life Beyond the Grave Father Herbert Thurston, S. J. November 19, 1927, p. 873 Reincarnation in the West Eva Martin December 10, 1927, p. 1040 Star of the Magi Reincarnation Series _______________ Anonymous November, 1899 to Sept, 1900 Theosophical Siftings Swedenborg Burfans Anonymous Volume 1, Number 15 The Necessity for Reincarnation Anonymous Volume I, Number 9 Reincarnation William Kingsland Volume 2, Number 11 Topics TN Reincarnation Alexander Fullerton Volume 4, Number 4 Reincarnation R. Matchell Volume 7, Number 3 The Reincarnating Ego. Jerome A. Anderson Volume 7, Number 14, reprinted from the New Californian, July, 1892. 210 Reincarnation, The Cycle of Necessary The Theosophist Rebirth to the Editor A. Govinda Charlu August, 1882, p. 274 Isis Unveiled and the Theosophist on Reincarnation H. P. Blavatsky August, 1882, p. 288 The Indian Doctrine of Reincarnation S. E. Gopalacharlu April and May, 1892, pp. 428, 480 Reincarnation in Isis Unveiled NDK October, 1893, p. 39 Transmigration of Souls Walter R. Olds May, 1894, p. 492 The Visit of Apollonius to the Mahatmas of India F.W. Thursday Stan. February, 1890, p. 257 Retrogression and Rebirth NDK, August, 1891, p. 655 The Hindu View of Transmigration R. Anatha Krishna Shastri May, 1894, p. 516 Transmigration in the Avesta NDK September, 1896, p. 749 Reincarnation and Zoroastrianism NF Bilamoria March, 1900, p. 331 Transactions of the London Lodge of the Theosophical Society paper on reincarnation _______________________________________________________________________________________________________________________
Miss Arundale number 5, March, 1885 Obscure Problems of Karma and Rebirth. AOLO Sinith number 36, 1902, Pamphlets Reincarnation in Western Religions WQ Judge ULT Pamphlet No. and Reincarnation H.P. Blavatsky and WQ Judge ULT Pamphlet number 10 The Diamond Sutra A new translation by Bhikshu Waitau and Dwight Goddard Buddhist Practice of Concentration Bhikshu Waitau and Dwight Goddard Postscript to the 5th edition In the 28 years since the original publication of this book, humanity has passed through many critical events, which have brought about important, and even terrifying, changes. The world has suffered the tragic experiences of World War II, and the bombing of Hiroshima and Nagasaki ushered in the atomic age. Nuclear research has resulted in an intensive program of space exploration, and the minds of the young have turned avidly to the intriguing mysteries of interplanetary travel and the development of innumerable electronic devices. But along with this intensification of knowledge, there has been a marked increase of neurotic ailments and psychotic pressures. The rapid advance of materialistic and mechanistic attitudes has undermined the moral life of man, and has left very little in the way of securities to comfort the hearts and souls of disturbed persons, especially those who have not yet attained full psychological maturity. The prevailing confusion and instability have affected man's personal philosophy of life and living. He has become increasingly disillusioned in the concept of progress, and he is no longer certain that the brilliant minds of his time have any real solutions to the heartaches that afflict this generation. A new morality is necessary. New ethical convictions must arise from social research programs, and science must ultimately 211 2I2 Reincarnation, the psyches or necessary reveal a pattern of practical ideals that will enable men to live together with hope and confidence. Many beliefs and opinions have fallen by the wayside under the relentless rejections of the scientific mind. Strangely enough, the belief in reincarnation has not been adversely affected, nor have recent discoveries invalidated, or even weakened, the philosophical foundations of this ancient doctrine. In fact, it is gaining greater recognition from trained minds than any other solution that has been offered for the riddle of human origin and destiny. The theory of reincarnation provides strong ethical incentives to right conduct, supplies reasonable inducements for the arbitration of national and international difficulties, and points the way for the future integration of both the individual and society. It is an idealistic concept founded upon the exact operations of universal laws, and these laws have already become the principal objects of scientific thought. Of course, the scientist can accept or reject any interpretation of the universe, but he cannot disprove that the operation of the law of cause and effect, which is everywhere obvious in nature, is a directing force in the evolutionary unfoldment of man. Another change that has taken place in the last 28 years concerns the old concept of infallibilities that dominated the 19th century and extended through the first third of the 20th century. Convinced that learning had attained its full maturity, and that what was already known could never be successfully assailed, the sciences had locked themselves in crystallized opinions to be defended at all costs. After World War II, a strange liberation took place in human consciousness. As it suddenly became obvious that a generation that believed it had solved everything, was falling before a new postscript 213 way of life, authority lost much of its influence. Many thoughtful persons became embittered and disillusioned through the realization that very few practical answers had been found for war, poverty, crime, and mental illness. One of the indirect results of the Second World War was the development of a world attitude toward the religious and philosophic needs of disillusioned men and women. Up to that time, the strongest exponents of the doctrine of reincarnation had been the Asiatic nations, and of these, the most articulate were India, Ceylon, and Japan. Since the war, we have come into an entirely new relationship with nearly 1 billion human beings who accept reincarnation as a perfectly natural, healthy, and useful belief. And what is probably more important to Western man,
many of the Eastern countries have undergone extremely rapid political, economic, and social development. It was easy for the West to depreciate a doctrine that was assumed to be restricted to countries still backward, underprivileged, and heathenistic. The average Occidental compared himself, with his wealth, luxury, and physical security, to the poverty-stricken Asiatics and was hardly inclined to give their beliefs much consideration. Now all this has changed. It is scarcely possible to insist that religious uniformity can be the basis of world peace, nor can we know people well, and share in their projects, without becoming aware that they may be wonderful persons, with deep and secure moral and spiritual codes. We can no longer convince ourselves that the Japanese people are still slowly emergencying from feudalism. In Asia today, believers in reincarnation are active in all areas of industry and research. In Japan, for example, a Buddhist may be the president of a great transistor industry, the chairman of the board of a shipbuilding firm. 214 Reincarnation, the cycle of necessity that dominates the world market, the director of a leading bank, the head of a progressive political movement, or a world-famous biologist or physicist carrying on research in the Tokyo hospital. Such men can hardly be written off as old-fashioned eccentrics who may be excused for their strange beliefs. It is also interesting to realize that the Honorable Mr. U Thant, Secretary General of the United Nations, is a Burmese Buddhist. All these conditions have opened the way for a more sympathetic exchange of ideas and a considerable increase of interest, on the part of Western people, in Oriental beliefs, especially in the Buddhist philosophy. 25 years ago, very few persons in the United States had ever heard of Zen, and fewer still were able to distinguish between the various major schools of Eastern philosophy. Since that time, a number of Oriental terms have been added to the English vocabulary, the concepts for which these terms stand have become increasingly familiar, and books on the East are more numerous than ever before. Not only has the doctrine of reincarnation gained in popular interest, but the researches carried on for evidence in support of the belief have been far from negligible. While there has been no actual breakthrough by which it can be affirmed that the doctrine of rebirth has been proved for all people and for all time, its advocates are no longer ridiculed or suspected of feeble-mindedness. Efforts have been made to estimate the number of persons in the United States and Europe who now believe that man has lived before in this world and is likely to live here again. The estimates vary, but it is suspected that the number may be more than 10 millions. The standard literature of the subject remains much the same as when our book was first issued. Actually, nearly postscript 215 everything that could be said was expounded more than 2,000 years ago by Buddha, Pythagoras, and Plato. What this generation is providing is an increasing number of incidents that seem to strongly support the teaching of metempsychosis. As may be expected, many such cases have come to light in Asia, but a new dimension has been added to the older approach to the problem. Eastern countries are producing their own scientists, well-trained in research procedure accredited men, whose reports cannot be easily disregarded and whose rights to be heard are equal to that of any Western scientist. Take, for example, the case of Dr. Hemendra Banerjee, who is director of parapsychology at the University of Rajasthan in India. The doctor has recently flown to Northumberland, England, to make a preliminary examination of a remarkable instance in which the parents of twin girls have become convinced actually, almost against their wills, that these children are the re-embodiments of two previous daughters who were killed in a road accident. The evidence, as it now stands, precludes the possibility of much wishful thinking. The parents belong to an extremely conservative Christian religious denomination, which is basically opposed to the idea of reincarnation, but it has been difficult to deny the facts that have come to light in the course of recent years. In this amazing case, one child has a white scar running down the forehead, and the other, a birthmark above her left hip. The deceased children had identical markings, in the same places, on their bodies. The present children recognized articles and toys that had belonged to them in their former lives. There are also certain mannerisms that are meaningful to the parents, although they might not be especially significant. 216 Reincarnation, the psych le or necs re to strangers. The most important data, of course, is concerned with the continuance of memory by which these children recall incidents from their former lives. The details of the case appeared in the June 11, 1966, edition of Weekend magazine, which is issued with a newspaper called The Sun, published in Montreal, Canada. Dr. Banerjee insists that he is not attempting to build an argument for reincarnation. He only wishes to discover the true facts involved and allow every individual to come to his own conclusions. Another contemporary scholar whose interests lie in this area, and who further indicates the present attitude on the subject, is Dr. Ian Stevenson, professor and chairman of the Department of Psychiatry and Neurology at the University of Virginia. He is also following up Dr. Banerjee's investigations and studying the twin girls in England. Dr. Stevenson's recent book, 20 Cases Suggestive of Reincarnation, published in New York in 1966 by the American Society for Psychical Research, reveals a new spirit of camaraderie in the related fields of psychological and psychic matters. Somewhat earlier, but of interest to all concerned, is Reincarnation, an East-West anthology, including quotations from the world religions and over 400 Western thinkers. This was compiled and edited by Joseph Head and S. L. Cranston, and was published by the Julian Press Incorporated, New York, 1961. This book certainly builds up a strong support for the belief in rebirth, proving conclusively that many of the most honored names in learning have been personally convinced that they have lived on Earth before. In most fields, a book originally published nearly 30 years ago would be considered obsolete. This is not the case with any basic text dealing with reincarnation. Interest in the postscript 217 subject grows whenever the human being is forced to face the realities of strenuous times. Without the doctrine of reincarnation, too much of human life appears to lead only to futility. Unless man has a purpose, the entire evolutionary process is meaningless. And unless this purpose is being advanced by the sorrows of living, our daily misfortunes are nothing more nor less than utter tragedy. It is difficult to imagine that this vast unfoldment of the universe is without a plan, and that man has been placed here merely to perish with the institutions and monuments he erects. Sanity demands a better way of life. The preservation of our cultural and moral heritage must depend upon the conviction that space is meaningful, that time is necessary to the attainment of ends, and that in space and through time, the human being is unfolding the eternity locked within himself. How can we escape the perfectly reasonable possibility that we came from somewhere, that we are here for a purpose, and that we shall continue our search for truth until we are one with infinite life? Manly P Hall, March 1967. Index Eru, reference to 199 Abhidananda, Swami, quoted on rebirth, 25 accidents, explained according to reincarnation and karma, 167 action, causes of, 176 Adam, his soul reborn as David, 81 ADI Bukda, the Supreme Lord, 200 Africa, belief in rebirth among tribes of, I. After death state, 155 etc. According to the pre-Homeric Greeks, 155 analysis of processes of, 157 etc. TDS effect upon the compound nature of man, 156 Albigenses, believed in rebirth, 94 Alger, Reverend William, on rebirth, 100 Algangins, teachings of rebirth among, 75 Allfather, return to, 199 Alternation, the law of, in the teachiness of rebirth, 167 Amenti, the blessed land of the Egyptian dead, 155 American Indians, belief in rebirth among tribes of, 65 etc. Amidba, reference ta, 198 Ammonius Saccas, mentioned, 55 Anastasius, on rebirth, 91 Animals, and reincarnation, 117 etc. Defense of the rights of, 118 Difference between men and, 117, in rebirth processes, 118 How long out of incarnation, p. 120 Not completely individualized, 118 pain suffered by, 120 Porphyry's view on, 117 anthropoids, place in evolution, 123 anthropo, the permanent entity, according to Gnostics, 163 218 Anthroposophical Society, teaches rebirth, 101 Apollonius of Tyana, his celebrated journey to India, 54 reference to, 53 Arhats, reference to, 198 Aristotle, preserved Plato's teach. Ings, 54 Arnobius, implies belief in rebirth. 91 Atharya Veda, references to rebirth in, 22 Aryan Hindus, Karma of, 131 AE Constantine of Buddhism, p. Astrolite, Dangers of, 161 Atlantis, Karma of, 132 Atonement, Vicarious, discussed, 183 Augustine, St. On Rebirth, 90 Avatar, Difference between Human Beings and, 136 Gautama Buddha, and, 134 Incarnation of a Divine Being, 133 Intercession, an attribute of, 135 Not subject to law of evolution, p. 134 Avatar worship, in China, 134 Babism, rebirth a cardinal doctrine of, 62 Bahuprajat, implying rebirth, 21 Bardo, p. Tibetan Book of the Dead, p. Baring Gould, dr. On primitive belief. In rebirth, 73 Bhagavad Gita, references to reincarnation in, 23 to 24 Bhattacharya, Haridas, quoted on rebirth, 25 Bhavachakra, will of the law, description of, 46 Bible, the, New Testament, intimations of rebirth in, and 3 etc. Old Testament, reincarnation in, 77 etc. Index 219 Birth, human state prior to, 114 Bodhisattva, definition of, 19 Bone, the pre-Buddhist religion of Tibet, 42 Bonaventura, St. mentioned, 94 Burrow Budger, sculpturing sun, 34 Brahmanism, reincarnation a major tenet of, 24 Brown, John P., quoted on rebirth in Islam, 62 to 63 Bruno, Giordano, accused of biliet in metempsychosis, 100 Buddha, definition of, 19 his definition of karma, 28 his explanation of rebirth, 28 previous lives of, 33. etc. Quotation from, 191 Buddhahood, attainment of, through rebirth, 33 Buddhism, and Christianity, attempts to reconcile, 184 migrations of, 43 Buddhist doctrine of salvation, 189 Burbank, Luther, mentioned, 121 Burma, memory of past life in, 149 Cambridge Platonists, championed rebirth, 55 Campanella, Thomas, mentioned, 94 Catholicism, on rebirth, 94, 99 Cherokee Indians, accepted rebirth, pages 66 to 67 China, Buddhism in, 57 etc. Emperor worship in, 134 Invention of printing in, 57 Rebirth taught in, 32 Chinese Buddhists, on rebirth, 58 Christ, compared with Krishna, 133 Intimations of rebirth in teachings of, 83 The divine incarnation, 135 Christianity and Buddhism, attempts to reconcile, 184 Clement of Alexandria, on St. Paul's belief in rebirth, 91 Compensation, Law of, see Karma Crusades, mentioned, 132 Cudworth, Ralph, accepted rebirth, p. 55 Cycle of Necessity, 19 Dalai Lama, method of selecting a, 43 The embodiment of Bodhisattva Avalokita, 41 Damis, disciple of Apollonius, 54 Death, the fear of, 192 Dakotas, rebirth taught among, 75 Deformities, explained in terms of reincarnation and karma, 167 Demigods, a higher order of life, 123 dervishes, their acceptance of rebirth, p. 63 Devi, Shanti, see Shanti Dev Dharma, definition of, 20 the power of selective action, 175 Diamond Sutra, numerous references to rebirth in, 58 Diamond Truths, the Great Laws, 201 Disease, related to heredity or karma. p. 166 Deals Rockley, Isaac, quoted on rebirth, p. 106 Druids, believed in rebirth, 11 Druzes, taught re-embodiment, 62 Earthquakes, as electrical phenomena, 127 Ecuador, belief in rebirth among Eastern Indians of, 75 Edison, Thomas, mentioned, 191 Ego, definition of, 18 Neoplatonic definition of, 163 Egypt, divinity of pharaohs of, 134 Elias the prophet, reference to, 85 Emanations, Gnostic doctrine of, 163 Emerson, quoted on rebirth, 107 Empedocles, on rebirth, 51 Emperor worship, 134 Erigena. Johannes Scotus, mentioned, p. 94 Eskimos, cycle of rebirth according to, 66 Reincarnation taught by, 10 Essenes, among sects teaching rebirth, 82 teachings of, 87 to 88 ethics, reincarnation and, 113 evil, mystery of, 9 evolutionary processes, 109 fatalism, not taught in reincarnation, p. 177 220 reincarnation, the cycle of necessity fate, versus free will, 175 etc. Fichte, mentioned, 105 Ford, Henry, believed in rebirth, 101 quoted on rebirth, 112 to 113 Fowner, accepted rebirth, 35 Francis of Assisi, St. mentioned, 94 Franklin, Benjamin, his epitaph, 104 105 Free will, versus fate, 175 etc. Gandhi, Mohandas, mentioned, 108 Jebers, among sects teaching rebirth, 82 Gems, magical powers of, 127 Genghis Khan, mentioned, 132 Genius, a result of rebirth, 179 Effect of glands upon, 181 Mystery of, 114 Glands, effect upon personality, 181 Gnosticism, favored rebirth, 84 Its definition of the incarnating ego, 163 God, incarnating through his avatars, p. 136 Goddard, doctored White, converted to rebirth, 102 Goethe, quoted on rebirth, 105 to 106 Good and Evil, mystery of, 9 Gregory of Nyssa. St. on reincarnation, 91 Growth, moral and ethical, 115 Motivated by karma, 110 Haggard, Sir H. Ryder, quoted on rebirth, 108 Harakir 1, mentioned, 170 Harmony, in the personality, 182 Heraclitus, on previous lives of Pythagoras, 49 Herder, mentioned, 105 Hinayana, Buddhist school, 30 Homer, referred to, 21 Hospitals, for animals, instituted by Buddhism, 117 Hume, David, accepted rebirth, 55 quoted on rebirth, 105 Huxley, Professor Thomas H., quoted on rebirth, 107 Hypatia, mentioned. 96 Tumblicious, mentioned, 55 Illumination, the way to, 194 Immortality, definition of, 17 Man assumes fact of, 111 Incarnations, divine, or avatars, 133 Interval between, 132 See also Previous lives Incas, belief in rebirth among, 73 Inga, Dean, on rebirth, 98 Insanity, explained in terms of reincarnation and karma, 167 Instinct, operating in animal world,
p. 119 Institutes of Manu, references to rebirth in, 22 Jalaluddin, see Jalaluddin James, George Wharton, on Amur-Ican Indian. Belief in rebirth, 71-72 Japan, Emperor worship in, 134 Rebirth taught in, 32 Jataka, Buddha's previous lives described in, 34 Jalaluddin, quoted on rebirth, 63 Jerome, St., on transmigration, 90 Jesus, intimations of rebirth in teachings of, 93 CTC. Jewish belief in reincarnation, 80 etc. Jiva, reincarnation of, 25 John the Baptist, mentioned, 84 Jonanites, among sects teaching rebirth, 82 Josephus, on reincarnation, 81 Julian, Emperor, Roman, believed in rebirth, 54 Justin the Martyr, asserting re-embodiment of human soul, 91 Karma, as solution to human problems, 9 Collective, pertaining to nations and races, 129 Controls law of reincarnation, 163 defined by Buddha, 28 definition of, 20 dependent upon action, 176 growth motivated by, 110 not operative in. Animal Kingdom, p. 119 philosophically explained, 144 etc. Index 221 quotation from Buddha, concerning, 29 resulting from suicide, 170 versus forgiveness of sin, 183 CTC. Kobo Daishi, reference to, 60 Quran, implication of rebirth in, 61 Sacred Book of Islam, 61 Korea, Buddhism in, 59 Krishna, compared with Christ, 133 the eighth avatar of Vishnu, 133 Kundalini, mentioned, 183 Lamaism, definition of, 44 Lamas, duties of, 45 Landa, Diegoda, on Mayan religion, 74 Law, universal, acceptance of, 187 has no exceptions, 185 Learning, Plato's concept of, 114 Leibniz, mentioned, 104 Eliplongian, Dr., on reincarnation among Maya and Quiche Indians, p1 L. LaRue. Accepted rebirth, 55 Lessing, mentioned, 105 Liberation, definition of, 193 disciplines of, 189 etc. Life cycle, length of, 165 life wave, human, the entities which compose it, 109 Light of Asia, the, quoted, 196 Love, definition of, 137 Lutoslawski, W., describes belief in rebirth in early Christian church, p. 93 Mahabharata, references to rebirth in p. 23 Mahayana, Buddhist school, 30-31 Manis, taught rebirth, 90 Manichaeans, accepted doctrine of rebirth, 94 Manvantara, world cycle, reference to, 200 Marriage, philosophical meaning of, p. 140 Mary of Magdala, reference to, 93 Mayas, believed in rebirth, 11 Religion of, 74 Memory of past lives, 19 Mendelian law of heredity, 166 Menuhin, Equity, mentioned, 179 Mercier, Cardinal, on rebirth, 99 Mercy killing, mentioned, 169 Metempsychosis, definition of, 16 in Hindu sacred writings, 22. Mineral world, reincarnation in, 125 etc. Minerals, condensation of, at remote time, p. 128 death of, 127 Mohammed, teachings of, 61 etc. Monad, definition of, 18 more, George Foote, on rebirth, 103 morality, reincarnation and, 113 more, Henry, and the Cambridge Platonists, mentioned, 55 Muslim, belief in rebirth, 62 Nalanda, Great Buddhist University,
p. 31 Napoleon I, incident concerning, 106 national heritage, 130 nations, patron divinitics of, 129 Nazarenes, among sex teachings rebirth, 82 necessity, cycle of, 19 Nemesius, on metempsychosis, 91 Neoplatonism, accepted doctrine of reincarnation, p. 55 its definition of the ego, 163 New Testament, intimations of rebirth in, 83 etc. Nichiren, reference to, 60 Nietzsche, quoted on rebirth, 107 Nirvana, as release from rebirth, 30 etc. As suspension of action, 198 as the end of evolution, 199 as the supreme end, 197 etc. Definition of, by Professor Rhys Davids, 197 Odin, an embodied deity, 134 Origen, on rebirth, 92 Orpheus, doctrines of, 52 Oversoul, description of, 163 to 164 Padmasambhava, founder of Lamaism, 31 Pain, suffered by animals, 122 Reincarnation, the cycle of necessity palingenesis, definition of, 17 Parsis, doctrine of rebirth among, 26 past life, authentic memory of, 147 etc. Past lives, memory of, 19, 141 etc. Paul, St., taught rebirth, according to Clement of Alexandria, 91 perfection, a relative term, 165 personality, a projection of the permanent entity, 180 harmony of parts of, 182 impermanence of, 201 rebirth of, 18 Pesani, André, attempted to reconcile rebirth with Catholicism, 55,56 Phaedo of Plato, quoted on rebirth, p. 51 Philo-Judaeus, taught rebirth, 82 Picard. Bernard, on beliefs of Incas, p. 73 Pistis I references to rebirth in 93 Plant Kingdom, collective entity of, 123 experiments with, 122 group consciousness of, 122 plants, constitution of, 121 Plato, on learning, 114 on rebirth, 51 Platonic Academy, taught reincarnation, 54 Platonism, on suicide, 169 Plotinus, mentioned, 55 Porphyry, on rebirth, 55 on the state of animals, 117 Prayer, in the light of rebirth and karma, 164 Precocity, dangers of, 180 Pre-existence, definition of, 17 Priscillianists, accepted doctrine of rebirth, 94 Proclus, believed himself reincarnation of Micromachus, 55 mentioned, 55 Proverbs, hint of reincarnation in, 79 Providence, examination of the accidents of, 111 Psychology of reincarnation, 189 Pythagoras, accused of teaching transmigration, 50 on rebirth, 49 Quetzalcoatl, as incarnation of the planet Venus, 134 Quiches, believed in rebirth, 11 races, evolution of, 129 racial heritage, 130 Radin, Dr. Paul, quoted on beliefs of Winnebago, 69 to 70 rebirth, definition of, 10, 15 explanation of, by Buddha, 28c. Also reincarnation, alternation of sex in, 138 as democratic concept, 112 as escape mechanism, 146 as solution to human problems, 9 authentic memory of a past life, 147 etc. Clarifies human relationships, 192 collective, pertaining to nations and races, 129 etc. Controlled by law of karma, 163 dependent upon action, 176 does not teach indifference, 195 helps man overcome worldliness, p. 115 history of, in early Christian church, 92 idealistic content of, 190 in the mineral world, 125 etc. In the plant world, 121 etc. Laws governing, 164 to 168 not fatalistic, 177 philosophical aspects of, 142 etc. Psychology of, 189 taught by, American Indians, 71-72, Anthroposophical Society, 101, Cambridge Platonists, 55, Cherokee Indians, 66-67, Dakotas, 75, Dervishes, 63, Druids, 11, Druzes, 62, Eskimos, 10, Essenes, 82, Jeebers, 82, Johnanites, 82, Manicacans 94, Mayas, 11, Nazarenes, 82, Neoplatonists, 55, Priscillianists, 94, Kches, 11, Rosicrucians, 101, Index 223 Sioux Indians, 68, Theosophical Society, 26, Therapeuti, 83, Vedantists, 25, Winnebago, 69, Yoga Sect, 25. Reincarnations, interval between, 132 Republic of Plato, rebirth referred to in, 52 Responsibility, personal, in relation to rebirth, 110 Revelation, Book of, refers to rebirth, p. 86 Rig Veda, continuity of lives implied in, 21 Roman Catholic Church, and reincarnation, 94 See also Catholicism Roman Empire, decline of, 132 Rome, divinity of the Emperor, 134 Rosicrucian Fellowship, teaches rebirth, 101 Sale, George, refers to pre-Islamic Arabian belief in rebirth, 61 Salvation. Buddhist doctrine of, 189 Samsara, definition of, 15 Sattva, defined, 18 Schlegentweit, quotation on rebirth, p. 46 Schlegel, mentioned, 105 Schoolcraft, Henry Rowe, on belief in reincarnation among American Indians, 74 Schopenhauer, quoted on rebirth, p. 106 Serpent Power, the, quotation on rebirth from, 25 Sexes, division of at a remote time, p. 109 Shanti Devi, the case of, 147 etc. Records concerning the case of, pages 150 to 154 Shintoism, reference to, 59 Sthis, definition of, 200 Su, inclined toward belief in rebirth, pages 67 to 68 quotations relating to their belief in rebirth, 68 Socrates, mentioned, 95 Philosophy of, 172 Solomon, reference to, 85 Soulmates, doctrine of, 137 etc. Specialization, danger of excessive, p. 181 Spinoza, Baruch, quoted on rebirth, p. 103 Spirit, analysis of nature of, 17 Sterling, M.W., describes rebirth as taught in eastern Ecuador, 75 Sufi, reference to, 191 Suicide, did Socrates commit, 171 Inclination to, 173 In the light of rebirth, 169 etc. Greater tendency toward during climacteric years, 174 Karmic results of, 170 Platonic view of, 169 Suicide, the, not a lost soul, 171 State of after death, 171 Su cavity, reference to, 198 Signs Sus, on rebirth, 92 Tagore, Rabindranath, mentioned, p. 108 Talmud, mentioned, 80 Tantric acceptance of rebirth, 25 Tashi Lama, embodiment of Supreme Buddha Amitabha, 41 Taylor, Thomas, on rebirth, 16 reference to rebirth, 56 temperament, balanced by discipline. P 195 Tertullian, mentioned, 82 Theosophical Society, teaches rebirth, P 26 Therapeutic, among sects teaching rebirth, 83 Tibet, rebirth taught in, 31 ruled by reincarnating theocracy, 41 Tibetan art bearing on rebirth, 164 transitional forms between kingdoms, P 123 Transmigration, definition of, 16 Troy, the gods of, 129 Tyler, Dry B.B., father of modern anthropology, quoted on rebirth, P 107 Upanishads, references to rebirth in, P 22 Valhalla, reference to, 199 224 Reincarnation. The Cycle of Necessity Vedantic School, teachings of rebirth in, 25 Vedas, ancient Hindu sacred books P 21 Vishnu, 10 incarnations of, 133 Vishnu Purana, references to rebirth in, 22 Voltaire, quoted, 104 reference to, 56 Washington, Jory, reference to, 66 Will of the Law, Bhava Chakra, description of, 46 Will of Life. Te, by Reverend A. Henderson, refers to Christian belief in rebirth. 42 Whitman, Walt, quoted on rebirth, P 107 Winnebago belief in rebirth, 69 Yoga sect, on rebirth, 25 yogic disciplines relating to death, P 161 Zen sect, considers rebirth as a ledger cycle, 37 Zendavesta, reference to, 26 Zohar, quoted on karma, 164 taught rebirth, 81 Zoroaster, reference to, 26 books by Manly P Hall. The Adepts, Orders of the Great Work, Orders of Universal Reformation, the Light of the Vedas, the Arhats of Buddhism, the Sages of China, Adventures in Understanding Buddhism and Psychotherapy, Codex Rosicrucis D.O.M.A. Dionysian Artificers, First Principles of Philosophy, Freemasonry of the Ancient Egyptians, Healing, the Divine Art, Lectures on Ancient Philosophy, The Lost Keys of Freemasonry, Man, the Grand Symbol of the Mysteries, The Mystical Christ, Old Testament Wisdom, Pathways of Philosophy, Philosophy of Astrology, The Phoenix, Questions and Answers, Sages and Seers, The Secret Teachings of All Ages, an encyclopedic outline of Masonic, Hermetic, Kabbalistic, and Rosicrucian symbolical philosophy. Self-unfoldment by disciplines of realization, The Story of Astrology, 12 the ways words to T for a complete list, rare book, reprints, bookseller or write, The Philosophical 3910, Los Feliz Bo, Los Angeles, California, copyright Higgs G. Art, offset, 06, 270466. Manly P Hall is the president founder of the Philosophical Research Society Incorporated. In over 50 years of dynamic public activity, he has delivered more than 7,000 lectures in the United States and abroad, and has authored countless books, essays, and articles. His quarterly magazine on philosophy and comparative religions, the PRS Journal, has been in continuous publication since 1941. In his lectures and writings, Manly P Hall has always emphasized the practical aspects of philosophy and religion as they apply to daily living. He restates for modern man those spiritual and ethical doctrines which have given to humanity its noblest ideals and most adequate codes of conduct. Believing that philosophy is a working tool to help the individual in building a solid foundation for his dreams and purposes, Mr. Hall has steadfastly sought recognition of the belief that world civilization can be perfected only when human beings meet on a common ground of intelligence, cooperation, and worthy purpose. The Philosophical Research Society Incorporated is a non-profit organization founded in 1934 for the purpose of assisting thoughtful persons to live more graciously and constructively in a confused and troubled world. The society is entirely free from educational, political, or ecclesiastical control. Dedicated to an idealistic approach to the solution of human problems, the Society's program stresses the need for the integration of religion, philosophy, and the science of psychology into one system of instruction. The goal of this instruction is to enable the individual to develop a mature philosophy of life, to recognize his proper responsibilities and opportunities, and to understand and appreciate his place in the unfolding universal pattern. For further information on the Society and its programs, please write